Hello, I'm Sant here, and a hunting swan had an idea. What if, I read this article, but in funny accents, and maybe I'll try that. A little uncomfortable with doing funny accents, even though I enjoy the idea of doing funny accents. But I also thought it'd be really interesting to go over this introduction article to my game, Psychopomps Are Missing, which is what you can see at the heading. By the way, as a complete aside, this right here, this font is not the font that I'd ideally want here, but I don't know how to change it to the one that I would want because it's not in Google's. Or this is on Blogger, and it didn't have in its list of fonts the one that I would like to use, which I use all over the place otherwise. But that's beside the point. Anyway, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of go over this and provide a little bit of commentary, as well as an update on where things are now wrong, because I was glancing at some of this, and many things are now wrong. It's just the nature of things, right? You iterate on the design. So, Psychopomps Are Missing. An introduction. Psychopomps Are Missing, working title, very subject to change, is an RPG I'm developing in RPG Maker MV that features a lot of custom code. I say this because when people hear RPG Maker MV, I feel like when people hear RPG Maker in general, it brings to mind some very specific ideas of what things are going to be, so I feel the need to state, hey, I have a lot of custom code here. It's going to do its own mechanical things. So, the game itself focuses on a group of 7 individuals who are the only people assigned to a specific psychopomp, when various parallel realities all collapse down into one, resulting in catastrophic chaos. By this point, I suspect most of you are wondering what a psychopomp even is. Psychopomps are beings that ferry the souls of the newly dead to the afterlife. Synonyms would include Reaper and Envoy, and famous examples are Charon from Greek mythology and Valkyries from Norse mythology. So, specifically, I chose this title because my sister taught me a funny word. So here we are, psychopomp, a word my sister taught me, and that's why this is here. The game itself will deal with themes that are important to me: religion, sexuality, non-sexual nudity, and culture. I'm very aware that the game I make will say something, and I want to be very expressive of myself through it. However, it is very important to me that the game I make is fun and engaging, first and foremost. So just to comment on some of this here about themes that'll show up, a lot of this is something that I expect to be kind of baked into the world building and story of the game as a byproduct of I'm making it. Everybody has something that's important to them, ways that they see the world, and ways in which they interpret that. So, for example, you see in a lot of Japanese games where they include emphasis like elements of Shintoism or Buddhism in them. And so I have my own sort of lens through which I see things and my own sort of perspective. And that's going to play out in the game that I make, in the worlds and cultures that are clashing, collapsing, whatever what I want here. And so that's just something that's going to naturally kind of come out of what I make. Is going to be part of the atmosphere of things. And I'm not sure how overtly stated things are going to be or not yet. I might get into some of that as we go on, but I have to be very careful about how much I plan. Yeah, I see that right here. So I'll get to this point in just a moment. Before I go any further, I want to emphasize a couple of things. The first is that everything I'm going to discuss about this project is subject to change, and has changed in many cases. At the time of writing, it's still very early on in the development cycle. At the time of recording, it's still early on in the development cycle. And a lot can happen to change stuff up over the course of development. Note that in any screenshots I might use here, that I have yet to modify the default Windows skin. I say this because apparently people have skin elitism about the Windows skins in RPG Maker. The default skin is sufficient. I do want to eventually change it at some point, but it's extremely low-hanging fruit. And really, anybody who's caring that much about, oh, you're using default RPG Maker assets. One of the big selling points to me on RPG Maker products is that they come with a bunch of art and audio assets, so you don't have to make them yourself. And saying, oh, but then you're just using the default stuff. It's well, that's kind of the point. Like I said, I do want to modify the default Windows skin, but this is just something that I felt I needed to include because of a perception that I have that there is elitism about window appearances, and I think that's a little silly. So, anyway, changing it, the Windows skin, is on my to-do list, but it's a pretty low priority right now. Still true. The second is that I personally have to be very careful how much I plan. If I plan too much, I found that my creative interest gets expended, leaving me with little motivation to actually implement those plans, which also begin to feel creatively stifling. Thus, many things about the game are still to be determined. I mean, this is still true, but I have determined many things. One thing that I do want to be very clear on is that I have figured out a lot of the mechanical structure of the game. I'm not working from nothing here. Drink of water time. Remember to stay hydrated, folks. So it's not like I'm working from nothing. I have the default framework of RPG Maker plus the code that I've injected into it, but it's kind of like a clay that I'm shaping and molding over time, and the structures become more defined as I go. So there is plans, but there's also framework and structure, and so I'm kind of working through that framework and structure. I'm kind of planning in a different sort of way where it's an implementation sort of thing. I've gone off the point here, but I do have general plans. I have a general idea of what I'm going to make, and the follow-up article that I did on this about what it means for the game to be completed, you can find it on my blog at santier.com. And you can find the Psychopomps Are Missing tag, which is at the bottom of this article, for example. And I'll include a link to this article in the description, of course. I should have said that earlier, but here we are. But yeah, so there are general plans for things, but specifics are something that kind of gets sketched in as I go. So more and more stuff gets figured out as I go and as I make things, as kind of the way that it works. There are a lot of things I want to cover here, and figuring out an order is hard. So here's a list of what I'll talk about so you know what to expect from this article. Character mechanics, battle mechanics, game structure, the world. Character mechanics. There are a lot of parts to a player character, mechanically speaking. They have stats, equipment, and skills. Most skills are learned from character classes, which is also an elaborate system. This is where choosing an order to present things becomes challenging, because most of these character mechanics are important to how battle mechanics work, and vice versa. So, which should I discuss first? There's arguments either way, but I've decided to start with character mechanics. And then I go into some stats here. So there are indeed a lot of stats. This stat screen is now out of date, badly out of date. There's several reasons for this, in part because I found certain systems were not working the way that I wanted them to, and I reworked things. I've moved this whole types thing to another screen. I'm not going to show it to you right now because I didn't prepare it and I don't feel like it. And I'm going to write a follow-up article at some point anyway that'll include screenshots. So if you're really interested in those details, you can look at it there. But you can read about a lot of this. I'm going to cover a lot of what's different more. But I guess we're going to just jump in and we'll see how things go. This is the first of several status screens. The elements above that horizontal line, this horizontal line, are consistent across these screens. To go over them briefly, HP, the character's hit points, as expected. The character dies when these reach 0. As a side note, you'll notice right now that this character, Deborah, has 152 out of 152 hit points. Something that I decided a little while back now, I don't know, a couple weeks, time is weird, was to change it so that way every character will have at least 200 hit points. This is for the purposes of balancing things. I was finding wildly divergent amounts of hit points, particularly hit point values below 200, just made characters way too fragile and made it kind of hard to calibrate damage, because damage that would be appropriate to characters with a higher amount of hit points was then one-shotting characters with low amounts of hit points. It just made things really messy. That's just, random aside. MP, the character's mana points, used as a cost for mini skills. This does not naturally recover, so it works as a sort of endurance mechanic between rests. It works as a counterpoint cost to stamina, which I'm sure I'll talk about later. Level and experience in the current character class. There will be more about character classes a bit further down, so I won't repeat that information here. Note, any changes made to maximum HP and MP are applied to the bottom. So yeah, this whole note is really useful for discussing what I'm doing with HP and MP. The basic point of it is the default functionality for RPG Maker is to have it, if you change your maximum HP, it does nothing to your maximum, or to your current HP and MP as well, of course, unless it goes below the current values, in which case it decreases it down to the new maximum. What I have instead is a system that's more like Guild Wars 1, where if you change the maximum, it applies the same change to the current value. So if you increase the maximum by 50, you have 50 more current HP, regardless of what the difference is. So if you had 100 HP out of your 200 maximum, gaining 50 more maximum HP would also bring you up to 150 HP. But losing 50 maximum HP would down to 150. You are at 100, but now you drop down to 50 because it's taken off what I call the bottom. And the same thing applies to MP. I think that this means that, like, I like this better because it means that changes, like skills that make change maximum HP and MP, have more of an effect and a more immediate effect. So this brings us to a long list of stats. Let's go over the leftmost column first. So there's a bunch of stats here. You have your core stats. I'm not going to like individually read these. You have your core stats of attack, defense, magic attack, magic defense, agility, and luck. These do a bunch of different stuff. But they're like your core stats. These are things that, as you find missing psychopomps in the world, you'll randomly gain increases to these, as well as HP and MP maximums are also core stats. And this is just built into how RPG Maker works. So I could do all sorts of funky stuff to make things derive in various ways. I kind of would like that system if I'm being like candid about it, but I also don't want to make things too messy. And so like based upon the way RPG Maker works, like here are your different stat categories. So you have your physical evasion and magical evasion that help you evade skills, healing power that improves your healing, healed amount that increases or decreases how much you're healed by, counter and reflect that give you a chance to counter physical attacks or reflect magical spells, critical hit avoidance, which it adjusts a threshold that makes it harder for you to get critically hit. Hit percent boost that increases your ability to hit effectively. It shifts stuff in accuracy formulas. These are useful to know because like they tell you how things move, but to some extent, you don't need to worry too much about a lot of these. Precision is another really important one that affects accuracy rolls, as well as damage values and stuff. And it works itself into the damage formulas. And so there's precisions for each different type. There's a general precision, which is based off of your agility in part, if I remember correctly. We'll get down to the formulas. I don't necessarily have them memorized, but that's affected by your agility. This is for things like martial arts and other skills. If it's if it uses your weapon specifically, then it uses weapon precision. And if it's a spell, then it uses your spell precision. And then there's the mana costs right here, which is how much. It's a multiplier on your mana costs. 100% means there's no change. That's the stamina costs. 100% means there's no change. A bigger value, of course, means that they cost more. Lower value means they cost less. Flinch chance. Flinch is a state. So for those who know how RPG Maker works, it's just an effect that's applied to a character. If you flinch, you can't do anything that turn. That's really all it means. If you've already done something this turn, then flinching doesn't matter. But it's just your chance to get flinched. Or like how susceptible you are to effects that do flinching. Because something might be like 15% chance to cause flinch. If this is lower, a smaller value, then that decreases the chance to be flinched. So like maybe it halves that 15 to 7.5, or maybe it doubles it to 30%, that if it was 200%. So, it affects stuff. Luck also gets factored into that though. So it's not like, it does affect things, but it's also kind of a little messy. Stamina recovery, this is very different now than how it is here for a couple of reasons. Because I reworked some values and how weight works in the game and everything. So there's still a thing that tells you what your stamina gain per turn is, but it kind of has like a base value of 25, and there's a whole other thing. So that whole thing has been kind of reworked. Right here, this status screen, there's the type rates over here that tell you how vulnerable you are to various types. So like the Scholar class is immune to Arcane, so there's the 0% here. That's really hard to see. And you can see resistant to fire, resistant to abyssal damage. Not weak to anything. That's something that probably would be a little bit different now, but and over here you see type affinity. Type affinity is just how good you are with dealing that damage type. What I've done now is the condition rates thing has been compressed, and you see all this blank space over here. This thing has been shifted over that way, and I've combined type affinity and type rate. So those displays are in the same spot. And there's a bunch more stats over here. Maximum stamina is now a thing that varies. Before it was just 100, but now it can be a variant value. Your stamina recovery, your MP recovery, like per turn, your health recovery, your HP recovery, those all now get displayed here, as well as your guard value and your dodge effectiveness. Dodge effectiveness is kind of a new concept. It's based on the changes to the weight system that I've made. So that's just represented differently. But yeah, so this screen now has that information there. Type affinity is not something that changes a whole lot just yet. And you can see like the vulnerability to various conditions. And I talk more about conditions somewhere. It may be this, it might be a different thing, but they all do stuff, and you generally don't want to have them on you. Yeah, so you can read this, but it's basically just like, this is how likely you are to be affected by them. And if you're immune, then you can't be affected at all. And if it's 0%, then you can't get a new one applied. This is just, this is here for players to have more information. I will say that it did a bit of an overhaul to some of these accuracy systems because they're producing ridiculous effects, particularly the calculation for sort of these upper ranges and how precision factors into this. I've heavily tweaked it because it was one of those things where the system was producing rolls that could result in like doubled or tripled damage based upon this accuracy roll. Like right here, this 273% would potentially mean that a normal hit would deal substantially more than it would have if you got a really good hit. Or like a critical hit could instead of dealing like 1.5 to 2 damage, 2 times damage, could be like 3 or 4 times damage, and it just could be absolutely bonkers. So I've really reined this in a lot because it was just way too strong. And yeah, this one does sort of explain itself because it explains like where things kind of come from and how things work. Glancing prowess is, again, it's a percentage value because I'm representing something here. To actually break down the math is a lot more complicated, and figuring out what the actual percentages are would be really messy because there's a piecewise cubic function, like 2 cubic functions and a piecewise thing that are involved. And I think I go over that later. It's been a while since I've gone over this, so. Equipment. There is a lot to discuss when it comes to equipment, so I'll be intentionally glossing over some of it in this particular post. Specifically, I won't be going into too much detail on class and character-specific gear. Without further ado, let's look at the equipment screen and discuss it. This is pretty much not changed. I do need to add stuff here for the new weight, or specifically speed. Speed is its kind of its own thing that tells you how fast you are in combat and has to do... It's basically agility minus weight. And weight comes from the defensiveness of your gear. I've done some pretty big overhauls, actually, to how defense works. Because what was happening was I was getting values I wasn't happy with. So we'll talk about that more when I get to damage formula, probably. But simply... Right now, the way that it works is weight is primarily composed of a sum of the defensive stats of a piece of equipment. There is a separate weight value I can add to it if I want to, which might is something that I'll use for some stuff. But the effect of that is like your class then has multipliers on it for how effectively it uses the armor value, as it were, of the piece of armor, and that becomes your defense stats. And this allowed me to kind of like recalibrate how I'm doing weight and then speed in combat to try to provide some balancing factor. But I really need to add a thing for speed over here, so that way you can actually see what your speed is. So that way you can make decisions based on that instead of just looking for the most defensive armor. Because like you might be getting very minimal gains for huge detriments to your speed if you have one of the classes that's just worse at armor. So. This is the character Johannes, and his equipment screen, and I go over the things here, and there's a weapon field. This is for your main hand weapon. These are all melee weapons. Conceptually, I guess the tome is now a ranged weapon. Let's see what I say about weapons. Drink some water. Yeah, weight. So weight is changed dramatically. The way that it worked is it would affect your base stamina regeneration rate. That is no longer true. It just affects your movement speed. The problem that I was running into is I basically had a flag that was this character, usually coming from the character class. So like right here, what I'm saying here, some classes and one character ignore decreases to this value, usually heavier, more trained classes such as the fighter class. I've changed this because as a binary flag, it turned off the mechanic effectively for the weight mechanic, which meant that there wasn't a balancing factor, so you'd always just use the heaviest armor. by changing out how things worked, it's very different now, because I wasn't liking how that was functioning. So some character classes now get much better effect out of armor, and the fighter would definitely be one of them that generally is going to get better effect out of armor. But the more potent the armor is defensively, the more it weighs, ergo the slower you are in combat. And the worse your dodge is, but the better your blocking is. So you can block better. Now, blocking does require specific equipment most of the time. One character does have a built-in block, so you might want to put her in heavier gear just to make her blocking better, because she will always have access to that blocking skill, because it's an inbuilt character skill. But it no longer affects her stamina regeneration rate is a really important point. So everything about weight is maybe a little bit off now. As you'd expect for weapons, this is the primary weapon that is used with weapon skills. Almost every character class can wield all weapon types. There is a character class called the Duelist that only uses swords. That's why this says almost. Different weapons have different weights by default. Not anymore. So this whole thing about weights is now wildly incorrect. Some weapons will have increased weight on them. It's not going to be a lot, most likely. But yeah, this was just a concept that I'd had that is now kind of gone, because the way that is working was not the way that I wanted things to work. All of these, it also, like, the weapons are more equivalent in power. Like, the biggest difference between swords, spears, and maces is that they deal different damage types and can be used with different skills. I've tweaked a lot of the other things. The hit percent boost that maces had is something that's not, like I said, that I'm evaluating this right now. I have evaluated it, and hit percent boost used to be something that made critical hits hit harder. It stopped becoming that, and instead kind of improved the ability to hit well in the second damage or the second accuracy roll. So, which you can see in the formulas down below. Those haven't radically changed, I don't think. But the maces now have slightly worse physical weapon precision. I think spears have slightly boosted. I don't remember offhand. But maces slightly reduce weapon precision, if I'm remembering correctly. And they all have, like, I think a chance to cause flinching. So if you're fast with a mace, you can potentially flinch people, which is really good. Especially if you have good luck, that's likely to go up. Some of the character classes also have, like, an inbuilt chance to flinch on weapon attacks. As of this moment, of course, everything is subject to change. So there's a bunch of default properties here. Daggers are really interesting, but, like, they have 30 slashing power, which is lower than the 75. Like, they hit twice, so, you know, it's or they hit an additional time is more accurate. You can stack effects that allow you to hit multiple times. So, like, there's a stance that the fighter gets called Flurry that lets you hit an additional time, but your attack stat is decreased by 25%. If you use that with a dagger, you'll hit 3 times. So, the big thing with daggers is that they're additional hits. Like, all additional hits work with weapon skills. So if you have a dagger and you use Mighty Blow, the fighter skill that deals 20 additional power, then you would have a 50 power attack that hits twice. Because, like, right here I say this increases the cost of weapon skills because obviously you're getting more value out of them. But when daggers were just lighter than other weapons, like, they were probably one of the better weapons because you don't want the additional weight, and they work really well with weapon skills. And they might still need some tweaks. We'll see. Mage's staves, they decrease MP costs. Hooray. Cleric staves, okay, they do boost healing power by 25%. Tomes have had a really big change. Right here I say they might need a buff. So I say that they're rather heavy. Again, weight's no longer really a thing. They do boost spell precision still and have 60 power and use one of the magical types. The magical types are fire, ice, lightning for kind of energy types, and then the more, like, raw magical types of arcane, abyssal, and divine. So those are the 6, like, non-physical damage types, with the physical damage types here being listed of slashing, piercing, and striking. Tomes now, attacking with them is performed as a magical attack rather than a physical attack. So all the other weapons, the 6 other weapons, all perform attacks as physical attacks. So like you bop somebody over the head with your staff, for example. There's two different types of staves here, as you can see, mages and clerics. Daggers, swords, spears, and maces, you're all whacking people with a physical weapon. Tomes, you're channeling magic through to do a spell, is kind of functionally how they work. But this means that it will use your magical attack stat, the target's magical defense stat. They can probably reflect it, now that I think about it. I haven't tested that, but they probably. And so there's not enough tomes in the game yet, is part of the reason why I'm a little uncertain about some of that. But they also work with weapon skills. So that Mighty Blow fighter attack that I mentioned, yeah, you can use it as a magical attack if you use it with a tome, which is really cool in my opinion. And that makes tomes good for spellcasters that are using a bunch more like of the physical type skills. Like it's got this really interesting space that it sits in because of that. Obviously, if you want to heal better, you want a cleric staff, and if you want your spells to be cheaper, you want a mage's staff. But tomes are pretty sweet. There's a bunch of offhand weapons. So like there's some ranged stuff. Ranged is actually pretty significant because ranged things can't be counterattacked. Like you can reflect spells, but you can't reflect like a bow attack. You don't, or a slingshot or whatever. You don't have to worry about somebody bouncing that at you. You don't have to worry about reflecting. You don't have to worry about counterattacking. So that's really, really useful. Catalysts, scrolls, and cantrips all contain spells. Catalysts do not require any stamina to use. Cantrips do not require any MP to use. Scrolls are like catalysts in that they don't require stamina, but they are healing spells, while catalysts are offensive spells. Cantrips can kind of be more whatever. Shields and charm bracelets are both used for the blocking action, which has damage go to your stamina rather than your HP. This, I don't know. I keep not 100% knowing where blocking needs to be. I feel like it's a little weak right now still, and I've done stuff to try to boost it. So this is one of those like in progress mechanics that I feel like needs to be a lot more appealing. Offhand daggers, the notable thing about these is these can have their own skill, but they will all have a skill that lets you attack an additional time if you have a main hand dagger. So if you're dual wielding daggers, you get attack 3 times with one specific skill that does that. This is potentially quite useful. Torches are a little bit of a less deep design space, but right now they've just been like melee attacks of elemental damage type. So like you can get a torch and whack somebody for fire damage. Gauntlets are also something I need to explore more. Armor is the main armor thing. This is probably somewhat incorrect. The big thing about here is like this is just like armor to defend yourself. There are a couple different types of armor. Notably, there are also enchantments, which I mentioned right here. There's one character who only uses enchantments. This is part of why I'm not recording videos for this, because she's a nudist and doesn't wear anything. She just uses enchantments, but she has 2 slots that she can put enchantments in. Most characters only have an armor slot. Instead of having a personal slot, so right here you can see each character has a personal slot for a personal piece of equipment. Instead, she has 2 armor slots, but she can only slot in enchantments. She can't slot in regular armor. But because of that character, I don't want to record videos because YouTube handling that, like it's small little pixel characters. But you never know. So, all of that said, armor is the thing that's kind of gotten some of the biggest overhaul. And it has armor values, and those are multiplied by, like all of your equipment. If it has defense or magical defense, it gets multiplied by the effectiveness in armor of your current class. But then those are added together for weight. So it's a very different system than what is being described here. Because I needed a different system because I didn't like it. Accessory, these are all dictated by class for the most parts. There's like a bunch that are class specific, and then there's like 4 different types that are dictated by character. So you can get like some like belts are character. Some characters wear belts, some characters don't wear belts. It's just character dependent. And so like there's 4 of those. So there's some accessories that are kind of like to the side. I should also note that each character has an offhand that they can also always use, regardless of character class. So that's kind of useful. And I specifically chose offhands that are less used amongst character classes to be ones that characters themselves specifically get. So that's also notable. More water. Yeah, rings, passive effects, signet rings have skills. Omni skills, there is one character class that can use 2 omni skills instead of using an accessory. So that's exciting. But yeah, you get omni skills. There's just a slot for just a skill. The brief version of skills, I'll talk more about them in the battle mechanics, and I talk about how you get skills, leveling up, and then there will be some character-specific ones that you'll get as you complete stuff, and some that you get at the start. I kind of feel like I need more of these, so that way instead of just there being 7 that are randomly distributed amongst the party, there's like a dozen or something that like get distributed, and so there's some that you might not see in a playthrough. I don't know. I don't know if I want to try to figure out designs for those, but anyway. Character classes. What do I say here? There are a lot of character classes in this game. Specifically, there are 42 character classes, which doesn't include the flavorful ones that each of the 7-player characters start with. These starting classes don't teach skills and have absolutely terrible stats. They exist entirely for narrative and flavor purposes at the start of the game. I am not going to expect anyone to even attempt to beat the game with these starting classes. They can't use most equipment. It's pretty much impossible. And yeah, I'm going to go over all the classes now, and I'm then nor now. Character classes are a significant determiner of a character's stats. Yeah, and then there's equipment. Finding missing psychopomps, I talk about this more later, but these do permanently increase your stats. I was just talking with a friend earlier, and I might adjust exactly how they give stats. Right now, they give you a random amount in a stat. +2 to every stat except for maximum 8, or the 8 core stats of HP, MP, attack, defense, magical attack, magical defense, agility, and luck. And right now it's like +2 to those except for maximum HP, which is 6. But it's randomly assigned, so maybe I want to adjust how I'm doing that. So that way, like, it's more in line with where you're trying to go. I don't know. Right now, character classes are calibrated to all have sort of roughly the same sort of... yeah, see right here. This is no longer true. So they are divided into 3 tiers. It's a lot messier now. Yeah, so again, each character class has 6 levels. You start at the first level, and each time you get a new level, you get a skill. But there's no stat differences like between levels within a class. And oh boy, yeah. So there's a lot that's changed here. This is all incorrect now because I found the system was too formulaic. One of the things that I really like. So I have this problem. I am design-wise, I am a Melvin, a Mel in Magic parlance, where I really like my beautiful structures. And then I actually work with my beautiful structures, and I'm like, this is too formulaic and predictable, and I don't like this anymore. So it's this weird sort of thing where I'm kind of like, when I first initially designed this, I had 4 base classes, and then they went to a tier 2 is what I kept calling it. I don't know. I've been super inconsistent in terminology and to myself. But like they had another tier up, and that as well as combinations, but it was like super formulaic. It was like get to level 4 in 2 classes, and they have a thing you can do, or get max level in a base class, and then it has a thing. And then each of those had an additional class. So that got me like an initial round of 24 classes. But it was like, why do I have additional classes when all they are is a bunch of stat ups? And the other thing is, like, the massive stat ups were like radically unbalancing the game in ways I didn't like. I like a more gradual progression of stats, and these were like when a Pokemon evolves and suddenly gets a bunch of additional base stats, except like way more aggressive, like doubling base stats. That was bad, and then I toned that down, and it's still a problem. So then I kind of like, okay, let's make things messier, but I didn't like disintegrate or disentangle that system enough, so things were still a little bit too formulaic. So long story short, there are now 8 base classes, 4 special classes still that you unlock by doing stuff in the game. There are 18 mid-tier classes, if I've got my math right, which require other classes and have a requirement and are required by other classes. So, for example, the Ranger class requires the Hero class, the Generalist class, and I want to say rogue. I don't remember off the top of my head. But like the Avenger class requires the rogue class, the knight class, and the warrior class, which the knight and warrior, as they are here, require other classes as well. The adjustment, so the like structuring of this is a lot messier, and so there are 12 final classes that you then are targeting. There is a system in the game to allow you to be able to specify what class you are currently trying to work towards, and it will highlight what you need for all of the other classes in green. So it's green and white. Hopefully that's not a problem for colorblind people. That is something I am concerned about. Let me know if that is. But you can see the white color here. It's a little fuzzy maybe because I've zoomed this in. I don't know what YouTube compression is going to do to any of this. But it will highlight in green if you need more levels in that class. So you just go in the system. I mean, you can select any class. You can be like, hey, I want to max fighter, and select fighter. And it'll be like, well, you need more levels in fighter to max it. You can select, say, warrior, and it will tell you what classes you have to get. Like, you still need experience in to be able to use the warrior class. Like right here, you can see assassin is grayed out because in this old system, you'd need more rogue to be able to get assassin. You'd need level 6 rogue. This is, I think, actually borked. The level counter here, it's all driven by experience under the hood, so this level counter should actually read level 6 because I think I was capping the calculation at level 5 instead of level 6. This is a commentary, you know, what do you expect? But the change up to the class, like I said, makes things a lot more interesting, I think. But you have this tracker so you can kind of see like, oh, I need this amount of these classes to be able to get to the subsequent class that I want. So you just highlight one of those final classes for a character, and it'll be like, okay, you want to make this character a wizard. That's one of the final classes. Wizards are good at spells, but also capable of using physical attacks, because I'm basing this off of Gandalf, who goes running around in a movie with a sword. So, you know, I feel like they should be capable of physical attacks. So, like, that requires some amount of mage, and it requires some amount of hero, one of the other base classes, and a whole slew of other things. So, some of sage, which is now a base class. So, like, these 4, fighter, rogue, mage, and cleric, are still base classes. Then there's bodyguard, which was a rogue/cleric combo, but is now just a base class, which is a lot better. Sage, again, this was mage plus cleric, but is now just its own base class. One of the things that was a problem I felt was you're spending way too much time going through the same base classes on everybody, and I didn't like that, so I wanted to kind of diversify things some. Generalist, which was like getting 1 level in all 4 of these guys and is now just a base class, has a bunch of very general skills that you're just going to want on most characters. Or like it has something for everybody is kind of what it comes down to. And most of the time you like need 1 or 2 levels in it in order to get to, like, every single final class requires you to get at least 1 level in generalist. Somewhere, some way, somehow. Let's see. So Sage, Generalist, Hero is added to this, and Bodyguard. So Hero is kind of it's a physical attacker that has some like healing and offensive magic that is like themed around its attack stat. So it's kind of like, I don't know. The idea is it's kind of playing more in like a Link from Legend of Zelda sort of space, kind of more that way. And fighter may not even be a base class at some point, because warrior and knight all have weapon themes that I don't like fighter as a base class for a prejudice towards swords that I don't necessarily want in the game. A lot of behind the scenes stuff here that you're getting in this video. But one of the things I did is maximum HP, MP, attack, defense, magical defense, agility, and luck are all being determined through base stats using the Pokemon stat formula locked us at a certain level. That level is a very nice level indeed, but originally each tier had higher base stat totals, so it was like 400 base stat total for base classes, 500 for tier 1. Actually, originally it's 400 for base class, 800 for tier 1, and 1200 for tier 2, and that was ridiculous. So then I made it to 400, 500, and 600. At this point, I don't want class tier, like classes, to drive your stats. So I've just normalized everything to 500 base stat total across all of the classes because improvements to your stats come from Psychopomp finding. That's like the primary way. There are other properties, these other things that you have in classes all the way up here. Things like your evasion, your healing, and precisions, and critical avoid, and hit boost percent, and all this stuff. That is driven by classes and will often be better in higher level classes, or at least different and things like that. But like these core stats are locked to like the same totals. And that was just, and also they have like at least, I think it's 90 base HP to give me at least 200. Little below that, like 88 or something. But I had to kind of rework everything to kind of make that work. And anyway, long story short, shorter anyway, most of your improvements to these like core stats here are going to be through finding psychopomps, not through going to higher tiers of classes. And maybe I won't even call them classes because maybe that's confusing people what they are, but it's a nice short word, so here we are. Yeah, and like the requirements are very varied. One of the things that I actually came to realize is I didn't like requiring you to max out classes. One of the things that's a big change is originally you would learn skills in a set order. So like Fighter would first learn Mighty Blow, and then Sever Artery, I think, was the next skill. And then Flurry, Wide Swing, and then Final Thrust. Those are the fighter skills. So Mighty Blow is just a generic weapon attack that improves your attack damage by 20. That was originally higher, but then it kind of made it hard to find design space, so now it's lower. Sever Artery makes something bleed when you hit it and can be used with swords or daggers. Flurry is a stance that gives you an additional attack, but lowers your attack stat by 25%. Then Wide Swing is probably the skill I don't like too much, but it's an AoE attack with lower accuracy, so it means it's a glancing hit more often than other skills is primarily what that means. It's more likely to be evaded if something can evade. It's less likely to be a critical hit. But it can be used with swords or maces because it's sword focused, right? And then Final Thrust can be used with swords or spears and deals the same plus damage actually as Mighty Blow, but it's always piercing damage, which sometimes you don't want. And if the target has less than, it's either less than or equal to 50% maximum HP, the attack deals double damage. So it becomes a lot more powerful, obviously, if something's really low. But like that sort of biases towards swords. So maybe Fighter won't be a base class because of that. I feel like I've lost the lead on this, but let's go into battle mechanics. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, originally it was in set order. I changed it so that way you could, whenever you leveled up, you got to pick one of the skills from the class to learn. And I kind of fell out of favor of making you, like, master a class, like get level 6 in it in order to be able to go to the next one. So, you know, here we are. I have chosen to break things up. And now most things do not require you to max a class. Every base class has a final class, or every base class plus the 4 special classes, I should be clear here, have a final class that requires you to max it. So, for example, Wizard, I think, requires you to max Mage. And as an example, Legend, I believe, requires you to max Hero. As just a couple of examples. So Legend is kind of like a bigger form of Hero. So there is the 8 plus the 4 makes 12, so 12 up. So those all do require you to max things. I don't think anything else now these days requires you to max any other class. And I just wanted some of that variety of like, oh, I picked these skills for this character and these skills for this character, instead of making you like do the whole thing. So it's a lot more. It's a lot different than what's going on here. There is something that was a little bit lost in that, by the way. The Scholar is totally about Arcane. That was originally coming off of the Mage at level 3, learned an Arcane spell, and then at that point you could learn Scholar instead if you wanted to stop being Mage and become a Scholar and just focus on Arcane. That sort of flavor thing is lost now. I want to mention it for the record, but I think it's worth losing that for a system that I think is overall a lot more interesting. If, shall we say, planning out this stuff is going to be really hard. I don't know. I'm considering trying to figure out a system to let you like repick skills. If you are like, I made a boo-boo. Like, I made a boo-boo. One of the generalist skills is a resurrection skill. One of the skills that you can end up with at the start of the game on a character is a resurrection skill. I accidentally picked the resurrection skill from generalist for a character in a playtest when that character already had the resurrect skill from that's randomly the spiritual gift skills from the start of the game. And I was like, well, I made a mistake. So I might want to try to figure out a system to allow you to be able to repick skills if you're like, I made a mistake. Okay, battle mechanics. Psychopomps Are Missing uses a turn-based battle system. It uses the same fundamental core that RPG Maker MV uses, but with a lot of changes under the hood. Yes, that's what this says. Clearly. Structurally, this means you input commands for each character in the active portion of your party, and then they and the enemies take turns performing those actions based on the speed of their actions. Let's dive into the steps and phases of a turn, discuss the complexities of the damage formula, take a look at conditions, briefly touch on buffs and debuffs, and go over the different types of skills. I kind of bury the lead here, but I go over to it here. The active portion of your party is because there's a portion of your party that's not active. They are still affected by turns ending. So they will gain stamina. If they have things on them that cause them to lose or gain HP, they will. They are not affected by skills that affect all of your side. That's only your active characters. So if you have a skill that heals all party members, that's only going to heal active party members. It's not going to heal benched party members. I mentally say they're benched. It's just, I don't know, Pokemon card game terminology or something. Too much time playing Pokemon. But you have your 4 active characters and your 3 benched characters. You can target benched characters with targeted skills. Enemies cannot target benched characters. If all characters on your bench are dead, you cannot swap, which I believe I say down here, in fact. If all of your active characters are dead and all of your bench characters are dead, then you go to the crossroads of reality, which is how game over is handled. You don't lose anything except for like where you were in the world. And if you're really aggressive about visiting the pocket dimension, you don't even lose that per se. But let's drink some water. So, yeah, you just start your turn by choosing to fight, swap, or escape. I usually forget escape exists, and I probably want to tweak its success chances a little bit. But swap, you can do swap before you do fight and rearrange who's in your active and benched party. And then you can choose fight to fight as long as you don't have as long as you have an active party member who's not dead, in which case you can only swap or probably escape. So you could probably have your entire front line die, sit on your bench and just try to escape repeatedly. But yeah, fight has you use skills or items. Dodging is affected by your weight. So the lighter you are, the better you are at dodging. It just adds to your evasion, but yeah, this just is standard like execution order. Final action speed is determined by agility. Okay, this formula is now wrong. Final action speed is determined by your move speed. It is affected by, I believe it's still affected by your stamina regeneration bonus, but not like, there's no, the weight. So your speed is agility plus 138, which is kind of a middle calibration value for armor. If you have a sum total of 138 armor, or 138 weight, that's medium. So that's going to be canceling out your thing. So it's 138 minus your armor. So your agility plus 138 minus your armor is your speed. So that can go negative. There's some formula that I have going on there to kind of like adjust how much your move speed versus your agility influences things. So the faster or slower the move, the more that's the value it's going to be. And the closer the move speed is to 0, the more your character speed comes into play. There's a whole thing that I figured out with that, and I don't remember it offhand, so I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I'm not looking things up, I'm just recording things. And this is why, like, if I was doing an article, I'd look it up, right, and write it in. So there's a difference between a video and an article. Once everybody's done everything, then end of turn stuff happens. I did put caps on MP and HP regen, so that way you can't just be one-shot by massive amounts of degen. Note that some enemies have multiple health bars. This will show up as higher percentages of maximum HP. For example, something could have 600% maximum HP. That means it has 6 health bars. That was a system I introduced to make sure that health degeneration effects that are percentage-based, such as poison, aren't ridiculously powerful against foes with large amounts of health. Like 5,000 HP boss should not be losing 500 HP every turn to poison, because that makes it die way too quickly, unless that's something that I'm very intentionally wanting to do. So anything that does percentage-based stuff is going to be looking at that sort of value. Makes Final Thrust real bad against those guys, by the way, because you have to get them down below 50%. If they're at 600%, it takes a while to get there. Yeah, so anyway, the regenerations are capped because I wanted to not have you get one shot by degen, basically, is why that's there. And then this tells you how battle ends, and yeah, if you game over, you end up back at the crossroads of reality. From there, you can go to anywhere you've unlocked a fast travel point for, or to the pocket dimension. If you go to the pocket dimension from somewhere in the world, it will remember that location, so when you leave the pocket dimension, you'll go back to that location. If you die, that location is still stored, so you can just go to the pocket dimension from the crossroads of reality and back out that portal to back to wherever it was you last entered the pocket dimension, which might be very useful. I don't know. I'm just telling you stuff. The damage and accuracy formulas. Get ready for some math, because this section will have a lot of it. But first, here is the general process for determining the results of a damaging move. The first accuracy check. The second accuracy check, and then the damage calculations. Once I've explained the ideas behind each phase, I'll go over the math. The first accuracy check determines whether or not a move hits or misses, as well as the possible damage range. More on this in the damage formula section. Misses are an atypical result, because I hate it when things miss, Pokemon. And must be caused by very low precision or some other effect that lowers hit rate or precision or whatever, such as the blindness condition. I've chosen for misses to be unlikely because I find them very frustrating, particularly in a turn-based game like Psychopomps Are Missing. At the same time, I do find the ability to cause misses to be able to happen very useful. The second accuracy check determines the type of hit, whether critical hit, normal hit, or glancing blow. It's also where evasion is checked, which causes the move to fail to hit and thus do nothing. As is to be expected, critical hits deal more damage and are more likely to inflict any states the move may cause, such as conditions. Normal hits are normal, and glancing blows deal reduced damage and are less likely to inflict any states the move may cause. I believe the state adjustment is explained later and has not changed. I think it's doubled for critical hits and like halved or quartered for glancing blows. Glancing blows, by the way, is a system that I have to be kind of a compromise. It's basically for hits that don't hit very well, so they're way less damage and less potent, but it's kind of meant to be kind of a stopgap between that and evasion. Again, as I said, I don't really like it when moves completely fail to hit. I think that's really frustrating, and I really, really don't like it. So I introduced glancing blows here to the system as kind of a stage thing between outright missing and doing nothing and a normal hit. So bad hits are more likely to be glancing blows than evaded. Evasion is less common. Move accuracy will kind of adjust that, though. So after all of that accuracy stuff, finally we have the damage calculation itself. This functions as a sort of contest between the relevant attack and defense stats. What I have written here is now wrong. In terms of like the actual values, this concept is still accurate. Moves use a base power, similar to Pokemon. In fact, I started off with the Pokemon damage formula, but moved away from it for reasons that'll be easier to explain after showing the math. I will go over them there, but to kind of just summarize, the reason why I moved away from the Pokemon damage formula was because I couldn't calibrate damage values properly versus armor. So the Pokemon damage formula fundamentally is a ratio between stats. That is, it is attack divided by defense. There's a bunch of other math in there that checks the level difference between characters in order to be able to adjust damage up or down if there's a level disparity, i.e. if a level 50 Pikachu uses Thunderbolt on a level 5 Rattata, the damage will be increased due to the level difference. And if it's a level 100 Rattata, it will be decreased due to the level difference. So there's some stuff going on under the hood there that takes, and this is based off of my rough memory, so I apologize if there's some inaccuracy in there. But if you hold level constant, you will get a multiplier that you can solve out of the equation, as it were, or segregate from the ratio between the attack and the defense. So it fundamentally worked as an attack divided by defense times multiplier. And what ended up happening with that formula is I ran into scenarios where attack was too strong, and the way that I could compensate for that is by giving a buff to the defensive part of the stat, i.e. make a smaller multiplier. So overall decrease the value, but that would make defense very strong. And I was running into places where defense was too good, and the only way to fix that would be to buff offense, or I guess you could nerf defense, but that works out to be the same thing, which would in turn make offensive stuff too strong. So I was basically having problems on both ends, where some stuff was way too offensively powerful and some stuff was way too defensively strong, and I needed to be able to pull things in. I adjusted it to an exponential formula that we'll go over later, because it allows me to be able to, instead of basically taking a midpoint and rolling it left or right in terms of effectiveness, I'm able to kind of like clamp down or release both ends at the same time, which is something that I've had to do numerous times. So I'll kind of go over some of the changes. I actually have a long list of notes in the code at that area for like, I did this change for this reason. I did this change for this reason. I reverted that change because wow, and things like that. So, and I wanted to base things off of Pokemon type formula because I have a basic understanding of how that works. Things have shifted a little bit since then, but I've tried to adjust the formula. We'll go over it more when we get to it. By the way, x to the y, this is just x taken to y. Y is the exponent, x is the base. For those who aren't super familiar with our high school math anymore, I understand it may have been some time. This is something that like math nerds can really dig into if they want to. I'm going to probably glance over this because a lot of this is just going to be absolutely tedious to read out loud, and is more written for informativeness for those who really care about this sort of thing and want to dig into the nitty-gritty. I will touch on some stuff where I've adjusted things, though. And I've used up that water cup, so it's time to slide another one over into place. This is where I talk about blocking as well, but I already touched on that. If you take a hit with 0 stamina, your guard gets broken, and your stamina drops to 0, guard gets broken, and then you can't do any actions during your next turn, and all sorts of other negative stuff. I'm not sure about this chunk out of stamina regen. I'd have to double check that. But it does have your defensive stats still. But blocking like always works in terms of stuff. Like dodging will give you a good chance to evade, but hits can still be glancing, and they can still critical hit you when you're dodging because of the way that formula works. So, okay. So, I go over the accuracy checks. These are not substantially different, I don't think. What is different is the way that I calculate out precision, the precision value itself, and some of the things related to this. Let's see. I think, yeah, precision, I believe I apply to hit base. And then the hidden value, the hit value, is not affected by it anymore. I would have to double check this one. But I made it so that way precision has less overall impact and is more often a lower value, because I was running into scenarios where the precision was just blowing up the damage values aggressively, particularly on critical hits, for reasons that can be seen. Where do I talk about it? Yeah, right here. So right here you can see if hit roll is like 4 or 5, this can result in like big values, but particularly over here. So I was having scenarios where I could have like a 600%, so that's 6 hit roll. That's 1.2. That's like double damage here. Yeah. That was way too much. And like that could be like adding 3. So like 4.5 times damage. Needless to say, these values were absolutely bonkers. So I adjusted how precision is being calculated into this accuracy formula in order to tamp down on the strength of that. Here we talk about how this accuracy formula works. Glancing prowess, I think, is adjusted slightly. Stamina regeneration is a bit different now. I'd have to double check how this one is. It's not substantially different, but it is somewhat different. A lot of the way that this stuff works, I think, is all the same for this one. Again, I'm not going to get into the math unless there's something that's, I think, particularly interesting to talk about. The big thing here is I have a piecewise function. So that's a function where above a certain value, or at certain values, it's certain things. So in this case, above the move hit accuracy, it returns off of one formula, and below it uses the other, and it basically just returns itself if it's at the move accuracy divided by 2. Because move accuracy is from 0 to 200%. And that kind of just shifts things around and kind of biases the weighting of the function. So that means more results will be grouped up around the move accuracy. So if you're looking at like wide swing, which has 75% accuracy, that means more often around the 37.5 value is where more of your results will cluster. So they're going to be closer to that area, which means like where you land in the thing is more likely to be towards the lower end. But the way that it's worked out is that you can always hit 0 or 1 off of the result, like as a multiplier on the result range, as it were, for like whether or not you're a critical hit, or like you can be moved out of the critical hit range with enough critical evasion and stuff like that, and you can push yourself more critical range if you have a higher hit percent boost and precision, which gets factored into the hit percent boost and upper end. Do I actually go over that here? Yeah, right here. So this part right here, it determines the high end. So like your critical hits are pretty much going to be like, is it above 1 plus the critical evade? So your higher precision will push to have more range here, which means that there's more room within the like hit, the second accuracy calculation to be a critical hit. And evasion pushes on the bottom end, and that's also where glancing blows and stuff apply. So where you land within that range between the smallest value from like glancing blow minus evasion off of the bottom end, and this 0.1 plus hit percent boost times precision off the upper end, like that's going to determine where your result is. So if you have a lower accuracy move, it's going to cluster more kind of around the section of that is where that would fall. So again, if you have 100% accuracy, it's going to be in the middle of that range where it's going to cluster. If you have 150% accuracy, it's going to be in the upper 3/4 of that. And if you have, say, 50% accuracy, it's going to be in the around the lower quarter of that range. And this is just to kind of like shift things around so that we have kind of a clustering pattern. But you're still like, even if you have a move that has 0% accuracy, there's still a chance that you could get a 1 on that range out of it, which again, with no critical evade, will generally be a critical hit. And if you have a 200% accuracy move, there's still a chance that you could roll 0 in that range. It's just much lower, but there's still a chance you could hit a 0, which is going to be glancing blow or evaded if there's any evasion. So it's just kind of like it shifts stuff around within sort of the possible result range, and I wanted something that would cause a cluster pattern. Hopefully that was interesting enough and made sense. You can read about this specific math here if you want to. Again, I don't think anything substantially changed in this particular calculation, except for potentially how I'm calculating glancing prowess, just because stamina regeneration has been shifted and changed. And I don't remember. I did that long enough ago at the point of this recording relative that I don't remember specifically how that changed with the changes that I made to weight. I think weight might have been part of it, and then I decided weight wasn't going to be a part of it, because it has having too much of an effect. The base concepts are more or less the same. And again, I think I adjusted precision and how it gets calculated into this to only affect hit base. So that way, this other hit value could be adjusted without like causing runaway effects where things were like stacking against each other and becoming absolutely ludicrous. I also like dropped some luck effects that way I wasn't getting ridiculous values here. And I might have that backwards. I would again, I'd have to check, and I'm not doing that at the moment. So then we have the damage stuff here. This part is the same. This part has changed. So let's kind of go over what's changed here, because I think this is rather interesting. First of all, to be clear, what's going on in this seems a little bit confusing, potentially, if you're not like familiar with looking at an exponential equation. And if you're not, I don't blame you. So what's going on here and what's written is I take your offensive stat minus the defensive stat. If those are the same, then damage is halved. That's what the -1 does. 138 works as a divider. So if the difference between your offense and defense is 138 in either direction, it will give you a -1 or a 1 there. A +1 would effectively double it from them being even. So if your offense and defense are the same, that gives you sort of like your base value. If your offense is 138 more than your defense, then you would have a 1 here, and that would double the damage. If you had 138 more defense than offense, then you'd have a -1 here, and that would halve the damage. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. This -1 here I added to decrease the overall damage that was being dealt. This effectively halves the damage. In exponential terms with a 2 there, an exponential term at 0 is a 1, at 1 is the value, 2 is doubled, etc. So if you shift that by 1, you're going to kind of go that way. If you go negative, you'll start getting 1/overs. So with 2, you would go at 0, it's 1, at 1, it's 2, at an exponent of 1, it's 2, at an exponent of 2, it's 4, at an exponent of 3, it's 8. So it's 2 times 2 times 2, etc. Going the other way, it becomes divided by 2, divided by 2, divided by 2. So you would get, at 0 is 1, so an exponent of 0, you get 1. An exponent of -1, you get 1/2. An exponent of -2, you get you get 1/4. So I use exponential equations because they convert differences, that is something minus something else, into multipliers very effectively. Because at 0, you get you get 1, because that's how an exponent works. An exponent of 0 is 1. It doesn't matter what's underneath, what the base is. This is called the base right here. The 2 is the base, and then this is the exponent up here. So it doesn't matter what the base is. If the exponent is 0, you have a value of 1, which means in most cases you're just going to get, like, if I had just this here, offense minus defense divided by 138, none of the -1, I would just get 1 if they are the same, which is what you want. You don't want any change if they're the same, right? If offense is higher than defense, you'll get an increased value. And that will go up to like 2 times if offense is beyond your divisor increase. And if defense is bigger, if it becomes negative, because you have more defense than offense, then it becomes less than 1. And so you get a multiplier that will shrink things. So it's very, very useful for that sort of conversion. And therefore, I use a lot to do that. So I had this -1 here to effectively add to effectively have the damage, because I felt like I was getting too much damage. I tried not having it there, and I'm like, wow, damage values are way too big. But then I kind of stopped liking that because I wanted to get the power of the move closer to the sort of raw default. As you can see right here, this effectively means that if offense and defense are the same and there's no elemental properties going on, that move-based power is roughly going to translate into the raw, like your raw damage is going to be move-based power. Stuff is done to the raw damage to kind of give some variance to it, but loosely speaking, your raw damage would be your move-based power with no elemental effectiveness adjustments. So this is, it's explained right there, but it's elemental affinity and elemental rate being taken into account. Think of it as kind of like same type attack bonus from Pokemon times the type weakness or resistance. So I was effectively having it, and I didn't quite like that, but I have a lot of the moves calibrated around sort of like standard Pokemon values of like 80 to 120. Where like your 90s are kind of like your good solid hits. You know, your 95s are your Thunderbolts, or 90s now. 100 is your Earthquake, and your more utility moves are like 80, like 75 to 80. So this is where you have like Mighty Blow takes most of the weapon values from 75 to 95, right, into your Thunderbolt and Ice Beam range. And again, I'm a little bit more old school in terms of the values there, but you get the idea. So I wanted to try to bring things more in line with the move base. I tried that, and I'm like, whoa, that's way too much damage. But it's way too much damage because HP values could be at like, 100, and or lower even in some cases. So if you had like 90 HP and you're getting hit by a move that has 90 base power and it's doing that amount of damage, you are smushed. Or if you have even less defense and is increasing it. So I went through the whole process of boosting all of the classes and adjusting their stats, but making sure everything had a base value of 200 so that things weren't getting one-shot by 90 power moves. But the 138 was still too swingy, so I tried like 276. I doubled it, and I'm like, you know what? The problem with this is it's kind of negating the effectiveness of stats, just full stop, to where it takes a lot to really get a big difference out of that system. Like, to get double damage from stats, you'd have to have a stat difference of 276. That's pretty severe. That's a really huge stat difference. So what I ended up saying was, I don't like this. Let's go back to the drawing board. I want to make stats more relevant, but I also don't want such extreme differences. So I adjusted things because I had this where instead of 138 here, I had 276. I'm like, that's a bit too much. Let's drop it all the way down to 64, which would make things very aggressive, but also change the base to 1.25. So what I've effectively done is, instead of having it be a really strong, like, doubling if you have, 64 more, it's just 1.25 times. So this still, like, it's a quarter more, so it still keeps your stats relevant. I could probably figure out how to calibrate it with a 2 here, frankly, but it's just easier to change the base to 1.25 or 5/4. So if you have, it goes down to 80%, and then whatever the next one is, probably 16/25. I don't know. I'm not here to think about that. And it goes, 5/4 is 1.25, and double that is whatever the double of that is, probably 25/16. Because that's how that works. I don't know what that is offhand in decimals, but so anyway, I adjusted it to that system because I wanted stat differences to have an impact, but I wanted them to have less impact. And one of the things that you can do to tweak this is you can tweak the base, and so I tweaked the base in order to make it less extreme when the exponent gets bigger. But the exponent has a little bit more range to work with, so larger differences to stats have more room to kind of come out and play. So like if you're getting up to the point where you had 125 over 64, that's basically doubled, but it's kind of works out to similar-ish territory, but it's not quite the same. And that seems to be in a better spot. I'm not sure that's going to stay there, but it's a whole process of trying to calibrate stuff and see what kind of feels right that kind of produces results along the lines of what I want, where characters feel like they're able to deal reasonable amounts of damage, that durability is not so high that nothing matters, but not so low that everything matters way too much, and so on and so forth. So, and like stuff could be adjusted. I could adjust how I'm calculating HP to just give everything more HP, for example, if I need to kind of bring because what you're kind of fundamentally getting down to is how many hits does it take to kill a character, and how much should stats adjust those rates. And of course, you have your elemental effectiveness that also plays into that. I'm tired of talking, but we're not done yet. Here's just where some variance is introduced into it. These are still the same. Nothing to say here. If you really want to dig into it, you can. I talk about some of the stuff here. Here's the stuff for, okay. So for stats, for inflicting conditions off of moves. So 30% chance to bleed. Would have a contest of luck over 100. This is still the same. I haven't adjusted anything with this. But then if critical hits are more likely to, and glancing blows are less likely to, and I had the values correct, so yay. The big changes there were kind of the things that I really wanted to touch on. I haven't done anything to these. I need to check, make sure blind works properly, because I'm not entirely sure it does. That's another matter. Conditions are a common group of negative states. There is another category of negative states called curses that have individual functionality. I'll discuss those later as a concept in the skill type section. Note that conditions are also different from buffs and debuffs, which modify stat values for maximum HP, maximum MP, blah blah blah. You know the stats by now. I'm being thorough. They all have some duration. Here's bleeding. It makes you lose flat amounts of HP and increases the chance that you'll get infected. Poison is just a percentage chance. I like having a difference between flat amounts of loss and percentage amounts of loss. Bleeding is really dangerous, by the way. If you have 200 HP, you're losing 20 off of poison and 30 off of bleeding. Bleeding is no joke. I do want to do this. I just haven't sat down and calibrated what the value should be on burning yet. Infection is pretty nasty just because of the reduced healing. It really makes it hard to kind of stick around. Dazed, you definitely feel. You definitely feel the dazed. Exhausted, I don't know. I don't know where exhausted is at. There's not a ton of stuff that does it, so... And it tends to be a little bit less obvious because you're still gaining some stamina at the end of each turn usually, instead of just, like, raw losing, so... but it will kind of deaden that. Chilled's effect to stamina cost, by the way, is brutal. Blinded, I'm not entirely sure is working properly because the time that I was blinded, I still didn't miss. And then Severe Wound is based off of Deep Wound from Guild Wars, huzzah, with a little bit of additional stuff thrown in. Buffs and debuffs are, I mean, they go from -2 to +2, and stuff starts at 0. And then it's just multiplied by 40% of the value. So if it's at 0, there's nothing to multiply by. If it's at -2, it's 80% decreased to be at 20%. And if it's at 2, it's multiplied by 180%. I am not 100% sure this is where I want buffs and debuffs to be at, to be clear. I'm actually considering, like, HP and MP need to work a little bit differently, but attack, the other 6... It's 6, right? Yeah. Attack, defense, magical attack, magical defense, agility, and luck can all be negative, and that doesn't break anything, I don't think. It just means your damage is going to be garbage, or your defense is going to be garbage. So I may consider doing a little bit more with buffs and debuffs, and treat them a little bit differently from maximum HP/MP to then the other two, but I haven't figured any of that out just yet. I do wish RPG Maker had a way of giving percent chances for these to occur. I could kind of manually do it in an awkward sort of way by rolling the chance myself and then applying the buff or debuff through code. But just with the effects area, you can apply buffs or debuffs for turn durations, but you can't give a percent chance that it'll apply it. And if you want to have increased intensity, you just apply it twice, which is not my favorite system, but here we are. I have a bunch of different skill types, apparently 12. Everything is a skill, unless it's the generic attack or dodge actions. Blocking is a skill type. Just a quick rundown of them. Full stamina is not 100 anymore. It's variant based upon your class, equipment, and character. Some characters have more stamina than others. So that's really important to be aware of. Yeah, so things can affect... I have added the ability to directly add stamina or MP costs to skills by type as well. This is notably important. We'll get into why in a moment. I am being very cautious about MP regeneration, and food is a very simple system. There's no crafting in this game to speak of. The closest is trading collectible items for other stuff, but crafting is like, I have made a plugin for crafting in RPG Maker, but it is very clunky to work with, and I just don't want to. So I've got enough other things going on in this game. I don't need crafting. It's RPG Maker and the way it handles items is not well designed for crafting. So while you can technically make it, it's clunky. Despite the fact that I would like some like crafting light systems similar to what Guild Wars has with weapon and armor mods, or its crafting systems, it's just not going to happen in this game, and that's fine. So yeah. But anyway, food is a way of getting yourself some MP regen. Some classes have inbuilt MP regen, very minor though. MP regen is extremely powerful, and so I don't want you to be getting too much of it. The vast majority of skills cannot be used outside of battle. Preparations can be used outside of battle. We'll talk about preparations extensively in a moment. Most resurrection skills can be used outside of battle unless something is giving stamina cost. If it has a stamina cost, you probably can't use it outside of battle, because stamina is not really a resource outside of battle. There's some very specific skills that can be used outside of battle as well. Yeah, as I say here, if it has a stamina cost, it can't be used outside of battle. So weapon skills, these are still the same. These all just use your weapon to attack, so they take your weapon's base damage, or your weapon's base power, and use that for their power and other visual effects. It's just RPG Maker's here's our sword doing a 3-frame swing forward. It's just that, but it's you'll see your weapon with weapon skills. Martial arts use the punch animation now, which is really funny because one of the characters has a tail. And has a tail whip attack as like her default thing, and that just has her punching because that's how it works. But they're melee attacks. Spells, these are spells that can be reflected. They have a couple subcategories of blessings, curses, and auras. These all have unique effects. Auras are based off of weapon spells from Guild Wars 1, where you can only have one at a time. Except I've also had the idea of having offensive auras that you can place on enemies, and it will replace an aura that they have on them. Yay. Signets. Signets are skills that don't use an MP. Stances have had a huge overhaul. Absolutely enormous. So stances represent being in a sort of battle stance, as it says. They no longer just activate extremely quickly. You can only be in one at a time. I have figured out, and I'm very happy about this, a way to make stances activated from the menu. So if you use a stance, it does most of the time it does not consume your turn. There are some stances that are waiting type stances, I guess you could say. I feel like I need some way of specifically calling them out. But like Snake's Defense is an Omni skill stance that gives you an increased chance to counter attacks for the turn, and a chance to poison when you attack. So, somebody attacks you, maybe you'll counterattack them and poison them. It has, that is a stance that just takes your turn. But a lot of the stances, like Flurry, you just activate Flurry from the menu. There's no, waiting for an animation. It doesn't take your turn. One of the things that I felt with stances, and I did not like this, is that taking a turn off to apply a stance always felt terrible, except for those stances where you're explicitly waiting there to counter moves or whatever. So if you're just taking a turn off to enter a stance, it was such a bad feeling. It made me not want to use stances. And I'm like, well, I want these to be a real thing. So after a bit of mucking about in the battle system code, I was able to get it working so that way stances just activate from the menu. So you use Flurry, and then you can pick an attack move that same turn. You still have to be able to spend costs and all that sort of stuff, and it still uses costs and whatnot to apply the stance, but it no longer consumes your entire turn to do it. Again, with the exception of the stances that are things that represent standing there, watching your enemy, waiting to react. So maybe reactive stances would be some sort of good subtitle, but there's such limited space for skill descriptions in the game. It's very frustrating, the limited amount of space I have for giving the player information, particularly about skills. It really hampers my skill design. Probably has some benefits, but it really does hamper stuff if there's not a good way of saying things briefly. because I don't want too much like hidden stuff going on. There's always going to be a little bit here and there, but I want to avoid too much hidden stuff, so that way the things work the way the player expects them to. So yeah, stances have had that huge overhaul. That makes them so much better to use. Way better to use. Preparations are conceptually the same. However, I've kind of, you see this thing right here about they last 200 steps, and then they'll end. You can only have one preparation at a time. You can still use them in battle very slowly, or you apply them outside of battle. However, I did not like the play pattern of preparations. I found, because what you do is you use, say, the apply poison preparation that the rogue has. That would make your weapon skills, or attacking with your weapon, have a really good chance to apply poison. 125% chance, which, if you have really bad luck and the enemy has really good luck, maybe you won't apply, or they have really good, like, a low poison rate where it's unlikely to poison them. They might not get poisoned, but it's a really good likelihood that you'll poison foes with 125% poison value. It's not exactly chances because it gets filtered through too many systems, but you have this 125% thing on your weapon skills to apply poison, and you're walking along and it just says so-and-so's poison apply poison preparation ends. You're like, okay, now you need to go through the skill menu and reapply it. And it's just really tedious to do that. Like it didn't properly like balance the effectiveness of some of them as well. Where it's like, oh, you use this, and so it takes a chunk out of your energy or your MP when you use it, because it can only cost MP because it has to be used outside of battle. But then you're just kind of like free reigning until it ends. So all non-item preparations are now just going to last indefinitely. There is a specific skill you can use that, like stances, does not take your turn to use. You can use it in battle and does not take your turn, and it cancels your current preparation. Just ends it. You're like, okay, I'm done with this preparation. Preparations now have some other costs to them. So apply poison just lasts indefinitely, costs nothing to use, right? Like preparation skills are generally going to cost nothing to use, but it makes all of your weapon attacks cost 1 more MP. Now, it doesn't matter what sort of multipliers you have. They all just cost 1 more MP. So you use, except for a normal attack, because normal attack is not a weapon skill. It's just using your weapon. So that gives it a little bit of a buff relative to anything anyway. You usually don't want to use it because your skills are better. But, your Mighty Blow, which is normally like, 20 stamina, 15? I forget exactly. Something like 20. Now costs also 1 MP to use. Your Precise Strike, rogue skill that has 150% accuracy and is more likely to inflict things like the poison from this. That is 15 stamina, but now it will also cost an additional MP. And if you have something that's a multiplier, these additives get added on after multipliers are taken into account. But this makes preparations just a lot, like it's a huge quality of life bonus to preparations. Again, if you find yourself in combat and you're like, wow, this preparation is screwing me, I don't want it up anymore, you can just cancel it and no longer have it active. But if you want it active again, you have to spend your entire turn just standing there waiting to apply your preparation. Item preparations, I'm still planning on lasting 200 steps, and I think that's fine, but it's the skill preparations that last indefinitely. So that's a huge change to preparations. I think makes them a lot more playable. In terms of like quality of life. Like they were fine skills. Some of them are extremely good, but they were also very obnoxious to play with in a way where it's like, well, I need to keep this up all the time. So every time a preparation went down, you had to go dig through the skill menu and reapply it. And that was just obnoxious, and I didn't like it. So I made that not be a thing anymore. Blocks and war cries haven't had any particular changes to them, although blocking itself is affected by your weight. I think I mentioned this. If you are light, your blocking is bad. If you are heavy, your blocking is good. That's the simple long and short of it. This is getting to be an hour and a half, which I think you can all agree is very long. I'm going to drink some water. Also, for some reason, recording makes my room really hot. This is relevant to me. Game structure. I'm using game structure here to refer to player goals and mechanical ideas about the world. The ideas I have for these two things serve as a part of the foundation of the game's design, since they guide how I actually build the game world. There are a few other principles that go along with this too that I'll touch on, particularly dealing with things like currencies and consumable items. The player's goals. One of the things that's given me a lot of trouble in past games I've attempted to make an RPG Maker MV was not having a clear sense of what the player's goals should be. In other words, if asked the question, how does the player win? What triggers the end credits? I often wouldn't have a clear answer. Furthermore, I also typically didn't have a clear vision for progression. How would the player advance through the world? This was a huge problem in Astral Collision, by the way. When I started working on Psychopomps Are Missing, I wanted to make sure I addressed this very real issue first. In particular, I started it while working on my previous, now aborted project, Astral Collision, which suffered from these problems. I'd previously mentioned that I used the Pokemon battle formulas when setting up my combat system to make balancing easier to do, since I have a deeper understanding of how those formulas practically work thanks to my time playing competitive Pokemon in college. I'd done this in response to the huge issues I'd had with trying to balance Astral Collision, and I didn't want to have to muddy through trying to figure out how to balance Psychopomps Are Missing like that. Like I did with Astral Collision, and I think I meant Muddle. Whatever. You know, it's one of those things where, like, I proofread the articles a couple of times, I read through them a couple of times, stuff is going to slip through, and Psychopomps Are Missing, it's going to be a lot like that, too. Things are going to slip through, but, they need to release sometime. I did the same thing when it came to the player goals problem for Psychopomps. I looked to Pokemon for inspiration. Most Pokemon games follow the same high-level structure. Beat 8 gym leaders, then conquer the Gauntlet, because my dad will tell you it's a Gauntlet, not a Gauntlet. I have to make him happy, right? I think these days they're kind of interchangeable if you look at the dictionary, but anyway. Conquer the Gauntlet of the Elite Four and Champion. I decided I'd do something similar with Psychopomps Are Missing. I'd have 8 bosses you need to defeat, then you can enter the final challenge of some sort of equivalent to the Elite Four and Champion fights. Story stuff related to who these characters are, it's just going to be a fight with 4 really powerful dudes, and then there's going to be a final fight with the thing. I've refined this structure some since then, but the basic concept is one I plan to carry through the entire game, since it's how I've decided to define the player's primary goal and major sub-goals. However, I have added one thing to it, which are the currently titular Psychopomps themselves. You see, they're missing. I mean, fairly early on, I liked the idea that the player could find the missing Psychopomps. I actually based this concept off of the gold Scatolas from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, at least loosely. My plan is that there will be 100 missing Psychopomps. At the time of writing, I did not have a document for tracking that. At the time of recording, I do! When you find one, you can talk to it, and it'll return to a sort of hub area. The Crossroads of Reality is definitely a sort of hub area. The Pocket Dimension is much more of a hub area, but the Crossroads of Reality is a sort of hub area. I mean, it's where you go when you wipe, and you can go there fairly easily from the Pocket Dimension. If you talk to the Psychopomp that was missing that you found there, it'll give you a permanent boost to a random stat. Asterisk. After a conversation with friends literally today, I'm thinking about adjusting how you get stats from this, so that way it does not go away from the way that you are attempting to build your character. I.e., if you're trying to build your character with one of the very physically offensive classes, which I'm trying to think through specifically what those are. Probably Legend is more physically offensive. Boy, I need to double check that just to make sure things are okay there. I know there's the mages or the wizard's got some physical offense to it, but is fairly balanced. I think the Kagaha, which is kind of like the penultimate combination of like ninja and shinobi. I have a lot of classes. You're getting spoilers on here. If you can call them, you can look at what all the classes are from the very start of the game. It's not really spoilers, but I just haven't wanted to talk about them too much publicly yet. But that one's definitely very physically offensive. So that one, you probably don't want to be ending up with too much magical attack. That one likes some. Like, fundamentally, most of them want kind of a split between them, so maybe it doesn't matter too much how mixed you are. But I might want to let the player kind of decide. I haven't thought through this at all yet, so you're getting a very raw Maybe I want to adjust how this works. I'm not quite sure. So giant grain of salt there. But when you rescue a Psychopomp, each character in your party gets a random stat. And this is now very much so the primary way of increasing your character stats, since classes no longer have step-ups in their stat quantities. There's 100 Psychopomps, so you're going to be able to get a lot of stats this way, by the way. So that's another argument for keeping it at least somewhat random, because it means that you can't just like force feed everything into the same stat, which I don't think is 100% desirable. Maybe I'll find some solution though, that like biases where it goes. At this point, I should stop brainstorming out loud. It'll create too many expectations. I think maybe I'm getting a little too historical here. Oh, yeah, about my plan, about how I came to things. So, to skip to the point, one of the game world regions is the Abyss. To get access to this region, you have to rescue 30 Psychopomps. To gain access to the region of the Abyss, where the final bosses will be, you have to find a total of 60 Psychopomps. At least, these are my currently planned numbers. Still currently planned numbers. If this sounds like Power Stars and Super Mario 64, well, I definitely was thinking about that some as I came up with these ideas. A lot of game design, I feel like, is looking at other things, and creativity in general is like looking at other things and being like, I like this idea. How can I incorporate some concept of it? Or, as will often be the case, I have this problem. How have other people solved it before that I can like learn from their solution? And maybe their solution is not 100% fit. Like the Pokemon damage formula was a really good starting point, but not 100% fit. So I shifted to something that's more in line with the Guild Wars 1 damage formula because I've learned previously the properties that one has, and it applied well to what I want to do here. Thus, the player's requirements to beat the game are to rescue 60 of the 100 missing Psychopomps for a rescue rate of 60%. Although, of course, finding all 100 will make you a lot stronger. And defeat 8 world bosses to get access to the final boss encounters. I'm really happy about finding a way to tie the missing Psychopomps into this requirement. It wasn't there when I was first thinking about the design, if that wasn't clear. World mechanics. I decided that I wanted the world to be composed of 8 major regions, one for each of my 8 gym leaders, as mentioned in the previous section. Because I can't seem not to use this concept, each of these is supposed to be a different reality, like Astral Collision, except about half as many. Astral Collision had 14 worlds, plus kind of a 15th, because I'd made 14... Let's not worry about Astral Collision. It was... There are 14 possible party members you chose 4, and each one came from a different world, and all those worlds came... What happens here is RPG Maker has tile sets for, quote, sci-fi, which is more like modern, and fantasy. And I want to make maximum use of the tile sets. So how am I going to have some areas that use the fantasy tile sets and some that use the sci-fi tile sets? Again, more modern. This is my general solution, is to have, like, this world is a fantasy world. This world is a modern world / sci-fi world or whatever. More of a modern world. Oh, look, their worlds somehow collided. And so this is the, like, functional reason why this ends up happening, and why Psychopomps Are Missing has the same sort of idea as Astral Collision. It is because of the medium through which I'm making it. It's because I'm making an RPG Maker, because RPG Maker provides me these tile sets. I'm like, I want to make maximum use of these tile sets. In order to make maximum use of these tile sets, I need to somehow have a reason for it to make sense to have the fantasy tile sets and the modern ones. And potentially I could just all set it in more of a modern setting where you have like more rural areas use the fantasy sets and more city areas use. But the general gist of it is like, this is how I've decided to approach doing it. And I like the idea of different realities. Like, this is one of the things that's really important here, is these different realities allow me to be able to kind of explore like different cultures and societies and different like ways that the world is structured. So that way I can use them as a sort of a foil or a lens for the player to reflect, more of a mirror, but you get the idea, for the player to reflect upon how they compare to our reality and experience. And so that's where a lot of the themes are going to kind of come out, is like, how have I built these worlds? What do the characters think about life and how things work and what's going on? How do they react to the catastrophe that's currently ongoing around them? I think I talk about the different world regions. Yes. So, like, people in the United States are going to have a response that's going to be more similar to how I feel the United States of America responds to things. Whereas people from Avarai that have a very different way of seeing things are going to respond a different way. People from Cybernight City have a very different response. People from here don't have a response because they're all dead. Except for the angels that are trying to fight demons here, but that's another matter. So, and other things, monstrosities. Where was I? I was up above currencies. So anyway, this is... I've gone over the meta reason why, I guess the dualist reason. For those who don't know, dualist and Watsonian is a very useful concept for analyzing a work, where a Watsonian is an in-universe explanation for the reason why something is, and a dualist is a real-world explanation. So the Watsonian explanation for why there's all these different things is because there's different things, and they've all collided together, and that's why you have all these different appearances. The dualist explanation is because RPG Maker MV provides me these different tile sets, and I want to make maximal use of them, resources they've provided me, including audio effects that are like, this doesn't fit in a fantasy setting for this like music track, but it fits in this sort of setting. Because I want to be able to make maximum use of the resources provided to me, I end up with this sort of solution because it is a neat way of solving it. There's a lot of things that are going to work that way. For example, when you get to Gymnopolis, this is a place where, like I say, the residents here don't wear clothing. I wanted a place that could express sort of minutest ideas and concepts, and this is a way of doing it. That's the dualist explanation. The Watsonian explanation, the in-universe explanation, is that these people have strong magical affinity, and so they use enchantments to protect themselves. Wearing clothing is a sign of weakness, because it means you're not able to defend yourself magically. That's kind of the Watsonian explanation, but that's sort of how the universe explains why things are the way they are. If you look at the dualist explanation, here's my other reasons why I have things the way that they are. So, there's just kind of a separation there. I think it's a very useful sort of understanding of things. But yes, so Astral Collision had way too many because, I mean, I probably still have too many, quite frankly, using the structure, but I have concepts for all of them, and I like all of them, so here we are. Hopefully I have bitten off a reasonable amount. It's one of those things where it's just going to be like, it's not, is this too much to chew? You don't ever bite off too much to chew. You bite off more than you have the endurance to chew. And so we're going to find out what's the case here. But I'm still enthusiastic about the project and looking forward to doing stuff in it, so I think we'll be fine so far. But I do want to finish this one, so if push comes to shove, I will probably lop stuff off. Not entirely sure what yet, though. And I prefer not to. So that would be a desperation move. Therefore, they all have different mechanical ideas and concepts. The different realities, in case we've lost context, because I was talking about other things. Another thing I've done to differentiate world regions is to assign each one different battle music. I reworded this sentence on the fly, haha! However, I'll discuss world regions more in the next major section, which is dedicated to the world. It is worth knowing that there are a few world areas in addition to the main 8. There is the Pocket Dimension, which serves as a home base to your party. For your party, whichever. I don't know. Do I touch on this? Yes. Cool. I will not talk ahead of myself then. The Crossroads of Reality, which is where rescued psychopomps go, and where your party is resurrected if all members die. The Wandering Wood, which serves as a sort of major connective tissue for a bunch of areas. The Abyss, which, in addition to being the place where the final boss encounters will be fought, is also a major connective area between world regions. Even more so than the Wandering Wood. However, note that you cannot get to the Abyss right away, so the Wandering Wood is quite relevant. And you also unlock one of the unlockable classes there. Haha. I have just been planning out how that's going to work, in terms of what you need to do. Another important world mechanic are locked chests. These manifest differently in different world regions, but generally speaking, they require a key of some kind to open and contain randomized loot. Chests get reset upon reloading a map. This is a little complex, as not every spawn location will have a chest spawn every time a map loads, thus providing a consistent reward for exploration, provided the player is stocked up on keys. The mechanic is taken directly from Guild Wars 1, though I intend for my chests to be more rewarding than the ones from that game. I don't feel like the chests from Guild Wars 1 are worth it 99.9% of the time. That 0.1%, though, you got something cool. Not very common, but you know. I will add part of the like ambiguity here, just to give an example. The two world regions that have chests currently implemented, Ashdala, which is going to get a bit of a revamp to its chest contents, because I have recently written code that allows enemies to have gear that they can drop as loot for the player, which eliminates some of the value of chests that I had originally. So they're bandit chests in Ashdala. The idea is that there's a bunch of bandits around and they steal stuff and stash them away in chests, and you can go open the chests and, oh, look, there's some gold coins. Yay, money. Or, some lovely bandit weapons. Except now the bandits are holding their weapons and you can take them off of their freshly made corpses. So you don't really need chests to have those. So I'm going to kind of rework what's inside those chests a little bit. But bandits will drop keys to their chests. So you can defeat some bandits, get some keys, go open some chests. Hooray, everybody's happy. Except for the bandits, because, I mean, there's an infinite supply of them, because this is a friggin' RPG with random spawns, so, infinite bandits, yay. And infinite chests, because the chests respawn too. But, you can keep getting loot from them. It's kind of a deferred reward system, but it's a neat little way of, like, making that more useful. I probably don't need keys to drop quite... This is me thinking out loud here, which is what I'm doing with my voice. I probably don't need keys to drop quite as often if they're not as important to getting loot, because now the enemies drop it more directly. RPG Maker has very limited amount of loot drops, so being able to implement a system that allowed me to give enemies equipment, which makes design a lot easier, let me tell you, because I don't have to figure out their stats in quite the same way. I can just be like, this bandit is a rogue, and it can have one of these pieces of gear for its weapon, and one of these pieces of gear for its armor. And the system will just be like, I randomly pick it to have these things. Allowing them to be kind of different for each one that you fight. That's kind of cool. That's not a thing RPG Maker normally allows. And then also me not having to worry about figuring out stats. Also very nice. But anyway, then them being able to drop the gear. I've kind of gone off the rails. But the point is you get specific keys that open the chests. The Kingdom of Dolphy is very much so themed after The Legend of Zelda, and so the idea is that you have grottos that you bomb open with bombs, which function as your keys, because inside are chests that aren't locked. And those chests will mostly contain money, but sometimes skills that are themed off of some classic Legend of Zelda things, like spin attacks and finishing blows and stuff. If I remember correctly, the finishing blow deals lots and lots of damage to enemies that have very low health, allowing you to finish them off, as you would expect. So, the exact way that some of that stuff works can be very different from region to region. Another example is my current plans for the Wandering Woods is that it will also have randomized chests, but these chests don't have keys. They're all mimics. So you have to beat the fight to be able to get the contents. So, anyway, that's kind of the idea about they will be different. A lot of them are generally going to follow the model of, here is an item that you use, you expend it to open the chest and get some piece of loot. I have also worked this system into some other stuff. For example, there's the idea of a gotcha machine that gives you random plastic jewelry in a store that you can get to very early on. Look, Ashdala does not have a great thing for explanations for some of the personal items. So there's just a random house that has a game store from the United Streets in it for some reason. And you can go in there and spend United Streets monies that you can make with the replicator in the pocket dimension, because who needs to worry about inflation when the world's falling apart? And you can go buy stuff there. And one of the things is I wanted you to be able to get some easy rings and bracelets and stuff. So there's just a vending machine there that's yeah, give me a little bit of currency and I give you one of these things, and it uses the same system as a chest. So it's technically a chest, but anyway, we're getting into the weeds here, and I'm rambling, and this is what I'm like. So anyway, I also want to briefly discuss fast travel. Let's face it, nobody wants to have to walk everywhere. At the start of the game, the player is given the Pocket Dimension Portal, an item that can be used for a nominal fee of crystallized energy. I'll talk about currency shortly. You get a lot of it. It's very nominal. Nominal. To return to the pocket dimension. When used, your current location on the map is saved, such that when you leave the pocket dimension, you'll return to wherever it was you last used the portal. If you die, and you can also go through there to go wherever you last used the portal. This is very useful for setting yourself up checkpoints. Notably, however, you can have the portal redirected to the crossroads of reality, where a different portal can take you to any fast travel destination you have unlocked. I wanted to say location here. Because after rescuing a measly 3 Psychopomps, that functionality is added to the Pocket Dimension portal. I like this upgrade. It feels like a really good upgrade and a really nice reward for finding Psychopomps, but it's also not that hard to find. Okay, let me revise that. If you know where all of the Psychopomps are, it's not very hard to find them. I know where all the Psychopomps are, so it's not hard to find 3 Psychopomps. If you don't know where they are, it probably takes a bit longer. But some exploration, like one is basically given to you right off the bat for teaching mechanic purposes. But, you rescue 3 Psychopomps, you get this really nice reward of now being able to just fast travel directly from the menu without having to do this whole rigmarole. It was one of those things where it's I initially implemented the rigmarole version and then I realized I could add the fast travel functionality directly to the Pocket Dimensional Portal item, but I decided, hey, what if I make you unlock it? And then I'm like, what's a reasonable threshold? So I put it at 3 Psychopomps. Hooray. Currencies. Something I wanted to do with Psychopomps Are Missing is model the way different cultures develop different currencies. I developed a system for this game to enable me to do just that. There are some repeats, as I had limited space, as you can see, in the main menu interface that displays currencies. For example, gold coins are used in multiple places. I believe Astrala and Bowan use them. So if we look at areas, Astrala and Bowan, United Streets, Kingdom of Dolphy, Cybernite City, Avarai, Gimnipolis, and then other places. So the Wandering Wood, I believe, uses CE. The Abyss will use CE for merchants there. The Pocket Dimension Portal uses CE. The mashup location that doesn't have a better name, it uses CE. Basically anything that's we are higher level beings, basically, or I'm trying to find the word here. Operating in a way that was already sort of above the different dimensions or the different realities, all use CE, because just crystallized energy. It's just they need some energy to be able to do the thing. You bring them the energy, they give you the thing. But other places use currencies for exchange because that's how they work. But that means you can just go to the replicator in the Pocket Dimension and be like, give me some of that sweet, sweet cash. And it'll be like, okay, give me some CE to generate the cash for you. And it's like, okay, cool. So, yeah, I think this is the only one that actually gets duplicated. Let's see, because there are 6 currencies here. Yeah, it's the only one that needs to. CE gets used in the most places. You'll notice that in addition to all of the lovely icons for various currencies, I might change this one, but I'm overall happy with them. This one might change too to be a little more generic. This is supposed to be the face of the king of Ashdala, and that doesn't make sense if it's also used in Bowan. So, but anyway, I might not because it'll just be a nice Easter egg, I guess, for people who are paying attention. Addition to all the lovely icons for various currencies, there is the differently aligned icon list CE. It's crystallized energy, serves as a core currency. I already talked to you about it. Hooray! Consumables. There is a delicate balance to be found between consumable items and skills, especially when it comes to healing. It's very easy for healing skills to obviate the need for healing consumables and vice versa. I've ended up doing several things with Psychopomps Are Missing that help with this issue. The vast majority of healing skills simply cannot be used outside of combat. I mean, this is just fundamentally true. There is the cleansing skill of Purify, which is one of the spiritual gift type skills that you get distributed at the start of the game. That can be used outside of combat, and it gets rid of a condition or a curse from an ally. Yeah, that can be used outside, but otherwise, you can use bandages to cure bleeding in or out of combat, as an example. But not having skills that restore health outside of combat makes space for items. This immediately opens up space for healing items to be useful, since you'll want them for healing up between battles. This is very true. There are a number of weak healing items that you would never want to use in combat because they do not heal for very much, but are very useful for healing up between combat encounters. Healing items are also useful in battle, as they generally activate very quickly. However, I've also set pretty strict limits on the maximum quantity you can carry at any given carry of any given healing item. Think Bloodborne's blood vials. So yeah, a good example of this. I have a potion item that you can carry a maximum of 20 of that heals for 90 HP very quickly in combat or out of combat, but you can only carry 20 of them, like I said. So, and you can just keep making as many as you want from the replicator in the pocket dimension. But if you're going to the pocket dimension, basically the most efficient way you can heal your party from items or outside of combat is to go use in the pocket dimension for 1000 CE. There is a med bay medical station that just fully heals your party of everything. It fully restores your MP, fully restores your HP. That is by far the cheapest way of healing. I'm pretty sure, but because that's 1000, it's 25 per CE per potion. But so you can see the 100 CE to go to the pocket dimension actually pretty low. So yeah, another big difference between healing skills and healing items is that healing skills are affected by the heal power and healed stats, while items are not. Caveats: some skills are also not. For example, there's a healing signet item because I love my Guild Wars 1 references. Healing signet heals you for 75% of your maximum HP, does not care about any of your stats. It does not care about your heal power or your healed stat. It's just 75%. There's another skill that is a default of one of the characters that is a percentage-based healing skill that is less affected by healing power because it was too strong. This was functionality that I have added, the ability to tweak how much healing power and healed stats affect the amount of healing for individual skills, and for some of them, I toned it down. Some of them, it doesn't make sense. You do not need healing signet that heals you for 75% to actually heal you for 150% or something. It also lowers both of your defenses by 1 stage each for 1 turn, so yay, be careful with it. Anyway, while this typically advantages skills, sometimes this is an advantage for items. For example, a character with poor heal power stat would be better served by using items to heal. This is true. Healing signet can only heal yourself, by the way. Making sure healing items are useful, but not to the exclusion of skills, is something I'll be keeping an eye on throughout the development process. This is true of items in general, by the way. I don't expect there to be a ton of consumable items in terms of stuff you'll use. There are definitely that aren't healing items or healing adjacent, but there are definitely some. You can use the bombs in Dolphy as an example, but the big thing is I want to make sure the consumable items that I add have space. And because there's a lot of skills in the game, between the 210 skills for the classes, because there's 42 classes with 5 skills each, that's 210, that's a lot of skills. All of the skills that come from other stuff, there's not a whole lot of room for items necessarily. So space there is somewhat limited. So that's something that I'm going to keep an eye on, is I want to make sure if you're buying items that there's a reason, there's a reason to want to acquire the items that are going to be in the game. Consumables are an important sink for resources. It's part of why using the pocket dimension costs anything at all. I need to make sure that there's a sink for the resources you're getting. And the value of sinks for resources is because it makes those resources valuable and useful. If there's not a sink for it, if there's not things that you want to spend that resource on, it effectively is meaningless and therefore stops being a useful reward. So if I want acquiring money to be useful and meaningful in the game, I have to give you things to spend it on that you want to spend it on. So it's very important that I have that. So that's where we have things like the good old-fashioned healing bay or the nominal fee on using the pocket dimension portal. So, and of course, I do want to make sure that they're useful. We are approaching the end of this very lengthy article, and therefore this almost 2-hour video now. The world. Originally, there were several different realities, all with their own peoples and rules of functioning, though all with the same language, because who wants to deal with that? Because I don't want to worry about language stuff here. The events that lead up to the start of the game culminate in a collapse of the barriers between realities, resulting in everything smashing together. Or mashing together. Depends upon how much S you like. If this sounds a lot like Astral Collision to those familiar with that project, again, defunct project, you can see a bunch of YouTube videos on my YouTube channel where this is up about my working on it, as well as why I stopped working on it. The combat system was not nearly as good as Psychopomps. I just, like, hands down, Psychopomps has so many superior mechanics. It's just crazy. But anyway, it seems as like this idea is a common theme for me when it comes to working with RPG Maker MV, likely because I want to maximize. Okay, we already talked about that. I'm not going to get too much into the plot here, though. I mean, the basic plot is the world smushes together. Your 7 party members are assigned to Yevoperin, the last Psychopomp, I think whose name I pronounced correctly, but it's... So, behind the scenes, sometimes I like to make my names by taking a word and another word and throwing them into a blender. So Yevoperin is... Or Yoro... One of the jokes that's going to go on is basically in the game is none of the characters can remember this character's name except for Deborah. And so whenever they try to say the name, it's like, oh, it's Yero, and then it's like, I'm not quite getting it. And then Deborah's just like, Yeroverpen, or whatever it is. But it's Envoy and Reaper thrown into a blender. So just behind the scenes stuff here. If you don't like seeing the sausage, well, I guess I don't know how you made it through 2 hours of this video. But yeah, so you have those 7 people together, and they're the only ones assigned to this last Psychopomp who's in charge of the Crossroads of Reality. Everywhere else collapsed. All the other Psychopomps got dispersed because everything is a complete and utter mess, and they just couldn't handle it, and they basically, like, fizzled out. Kind of the idea is kind of like their power got overwhelmed and, like, shorted out or whatever. So, Yeto, whatever, is able, the last Psychopomp, we'll call him that, is able to rescue your 7 people and is like, well, you have been divinely appointed by the Maker to fix everything because you're assigned to me, and that's just how things are going to roll now. And so your party is like, okay, I guess we're fixing reality, and we're functionally, like, immortal because the last Psychopomp just keeps bringing them back to life if they die, if they have a complete wipe, which is why you end up back in the Crossroads of Reality when you die. The last Psychopomp has gone and rescued you. But you can also just be resurrected because you are more easily resurrected because of the way everything's working. Underlying metaphysics stuff or whatever word belongs there. Metabiology? I have no idea. So anyway, the plot is you go to these 8 world regions and defeat these bosses, and you find 60 of the missing Psychopomps, and that allows you to go and confront the angels who messed everything up and are, like, not handling it well, and then the monstrous creation that happened when all of the souls from the where are they of all of the people from the mangled remains of Idamanoth and Orofraj crashed together and mushed into some horrendous goo, and then they made a horrendous monster, and you have to go defeat that. Hooray! There. I've given you the overview of the plot, but it's going to be a lot more in depth and a lot more interesting than that, I hope. Or at least, like, let's be real. This game is not about the plot. This game is about exploring the locations and exploring the interactions between the characters. The plot is a fairly simple and straightforward thing. I've just given you an overview of basically what happens. Congratulations. This is where I'm kind of, I guess, revealing it. But the idea here is, like, the plot is fairly straightforward. What you need to do in there is fairly straightforward. The interest and the intricacies come from the individual world region plots, what's going on in that region, and learning about that area, learning about how it works and the people, and then also the interactions between your characters. I don't mean to say that any of these things are going to be specifically deep or shallow, because I don't know. I haven't made all of them yet. Some NPCs are going to be fairly shallow. They're just, going to be your, like, this is how things are sort of thing. But everything should work together to build some sort of tapestry. So, like, Ash'Dala, for example, heavily based off of Pre-Steering from Guild Wars 1, and has a wall, but unlike Pre-Steering from Guild Wars 1, You have a bunch of people who have been fleeing south from the wall and now are a bunch of refugees. And you have a bunch of people who are like freaked out and have become bandits and are preying on these people who are trying to become refugees. Some of the refugees are like, we want to join the military. So you have people who are training in the military, and you have a lot of stuff going on there. So like, as you kind of figure out what's going on in each individual region and what's happening, like some of the characters in your party come from the Kingdom of Dolphy and are like, the princess, one of them is the Princess of Dolphy, and everybody's like, oh, wait, we had your funeral. What are you doing alive? What is going on? And like everything kind of cascading off of that. So like there's different things that are going to be happening in each individual area, and digging into those, learning about what's going on in the world regions, how the people are handling things. That's where a lot of the interest is going to be. It's not in the overarching plot, because that's like, it's a fairly straightforward path. It's when you come down to the summary of it, but it's the details, the moments of that path, which is where the interest lies. I think most people who are familiar with RPGs know this. Like if you go to some RPG, sometimes there's a really great twist in there, and it's not like, you don't want to necessarily spoil it. But if you go to the original Pokemon, like, what is the plot of the original Pokemon? Some 10-year-old kid gets a superpowered pet, goes on a journey of training that pet and proving their ability to train pets, superpowered magical pets. Maybe tries to catch all of them if they feel like it, and defeats some criminal organization for some who knows why reason, and concludes by proving their worth in a grand contest with their rival from their same town. Like, that's the basic plot of Pokemon, right? But it's the intricate details of what happens in those areas that becomes interesting, and a lot of it's the gameplay, and I want to make sure I have really interesting gameplay. That's really important to me, because anything else that I do with the game is as far as I'm concerned, like, less important than having a game that is fun and enjoyable to play. And so while there's going to be a lot of elements that are very much driven by who I am and what I'm trying to understand about the world and sort of explore about it, and I want to share that with all of you, at like the core of it needs to be a solid game that's fun to play. And like, so that's kind of what I want. I also want to try to make sure I avoid like any sort of preaching in the game. That's not the point of a game. The point of a game, in my opinion, is like, if you want to be preached at, go to a sermon, or go on Twitter, I guess. But the point of a game is to like be able to experience a place, and that's what I want to provide. I want to provide a place, like several places for you to experience and sort of like get a feel for the atmosphere, get your feet wet in the water of the culture and concepts of each individual world, and that's where I think most of the interest is going to be. So anyway, that is talking about all of that. So like, yeah, I've given you the rough overview of the plot, but you know, that's kind of, I already gave it to you when I talked about the structure of things. I just got into a little bit more specifics about what that structure actually is going to look like. But I do want to touch on the various world regions a bit here. At the time of this writing, I haven't started working on many of these world regions. That's still true. Ashdala and the like the Pocket Dimension and the Crossroads. If you look at the other thing, I'll go over. The Pocket Dimension is like got a lot of work done on it, but has a long way to go in terms of like things that I will need later, much later. Crossroads Reality is pretty much in a good spot, except for what am I doing with Last Psychopomp when you talk to him. The Abyss, like everything has concepts now, and when I did the update article about where is the state of the game, not everywhere had concepts. So everywhere does have concepts now, and that's really good. Yeah, this is another note. Like, I'm not necessarily trying to check to see if things are offensive, because that's a whole other thing. I do want to try to avoid being offensive. So if something is, please let me know. And don't just tell me that it's offensive. Please tell me why, so I can make a more informed decision on it. Because it might be that you find something personally offensive, but maybe that's just gonna, like, that's not, like, this sounds callous, but maybe you finding it personally offensive is not necessarily a strong reason to, like, change it. It's just, unfortunately, how things are going to be, because different people have different, like, thresholds for different things. And hopefully there's nothing, like, there's a certain amount of, like, my desire isn't to offend people, but I also need a certain amount of, like, room to be able to be creatively expressive of myself. So if for some reason calling a place Avaray is offensive to somebody, I want to know, because that name doesn't have to be that name. It's literally just like I saw some stuff, some names of some people on Twitter, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll slap a couple of things together for a name. Like, it's not important what this place is called. The Kingdom of Dolphy a little bit more, just because like some characters are named that, but I can change Dolphy if I need to. But like if there's a reason why some of those things should be changed, but like the United Streets, this name, it has a hidden layer of meaning to it, being coming from the United States of America, that it's supposed to be kind of an examination of to an extent. So like there's some of this stuff. Some stuff, though, like some of the non-sexual nudity in the game, will be offensive to some people. I understand that, and like that's why I'm not putting videos up on YouTube, because it's going to be offensive to YouTube's algorithms and whatever. But it's important enough to me to have that is just going to be there. So that's kind of the sort of thing I'm talking about. If that creates a good level of distinction. So world regions. The Pocket Dimension. This is a small region that functions as a main hub for the player's party. From here, you can change the party members' classes, use the only full heal surface in the game. Not that there aren't other surfaces elsewhere that can heal you, but this one cleans up everything. To be clear, there are things that can restore your HP. This is the main place where you can get cleaned up of like conditions or curses that are on you. So, buy consumables and various equipment from the replicator, and have conversations between your characters. It also is where you can look up stuff about the classes. That there's an NPC that you talk to change your character classes, and that NPC, she will also allow you to review all of the stats and skills and requirements to use for each class. Excuse me, I got some hiccups here. For each class, and it also, she lets you use the class planner. I talked about this earlier, but just a quick review. You select a class that you want to max out, and it will tell you when you have learned every other class to the degree that you need to be able to get there by highlighting them in green in like a couple of different menus that have to do with classes. And I want to expand it to a couple more, so it's easier to just like at a glance know, oh yeah, this character needs to continue on in this class, or this character is done learning stuff in this class. Those are some really useful things. I also will have an NPC here with a bunch of information about combat mechanics that I'm going to implement towards the end of the game when stuff is a lot more locked down. I do want the player to be able to reference stuff and have access to good and accurate information in-game. To some extent, this might result in some areas being a bit overly verbose for some players. For example, the status screens that have this huge pile of stats. You probably don't care about most of those too much. But like for the players who really want to dig into it, I want to make that information available and accessible to locate. And this is also something like if players want to look things up here for the math, like I will have areas where I'm sure on my blog where I've gone into the math in more detail. And I'll probably cover it in some update thing, or you can look at it here or whatever. But like, I want to make sure I have an NPC that will give you like good information about how combat things work and like what conditions do, for example. That's not something I want to do until everything is much further down the line and like set. So some of this information that I'm telling you right now is redundant with the update article if you've seen that. If you're still here, Hunting Swan, I hope you're enjoying this lengthy look at this article. Holy moly. I'm calling out Hunting Swan specifically because Hunting Swan, he really liked the update videos I did for Astro Collision, so that's why. Also a fellow RPG maker, like game dev working with RPG Maker, a different version, that streams sometimes. I will try to have a link in the description to his Twitch channel if you want to go check that out. A little bit of a shout out, extremely late into the video. Anyway, the relationships between your characters will be theoretically, I want them to be important. I need to do more work on the characters. Getting the core mechanics of being able to play through the game is more of a priority right now. And I need to do more work on developing who the characters are. And to some extent, I expect to be able to figure that out better as I work on other parts of the game and get them more figured out. Because people are a product of personality and culture and other things. So like there's a bunch of different things that make people who they are. So I need to kind of develop the places that people are from a bit better to have an idea of what's shaped their understanding of the world. But anyway, this is going to be an important system in my mind in terms of like examining characters and stuff, and learning new skills as they develop gives a mechanical incentive to this system, but also allows me to tie the mechanics and the character concepts and like the character growth together and make it a more like real thing. Like it feels like it's a more real thing when a character's like, I have learned a thing, and that results in them having a new skill they can use in combat. It's like their existing skills. Like a really good example is Montana. She's a character that has a like built-in blocking skills called personal boundary, because she has really strong personal boundaries, and so she mechanically represents that by basically having a built-in blocking skill. As an example, Jimothy is like, he's a professor and he gets really obsessed on stuff, and so his default skill is tunnel vision that basically gives it an like absolutely crushes an enemy's ability to evade stuff. That makes you want to focus in on that enemy. You can't choose which enemy it is. It's at random. So that means like you tunnel vision in on something. Everybody wants to target that. So it's like a mechanical representation of of a personality trait of his. So like all of the characters have this sort of thing going on. And like as they develop, they're going to get new skills that kind of explore and mechanically make relevant, mechanically make real how they're changing as characters. That is the plan. We will see how it goes, because like any plan, it can go awry. So just trying to set out what I want to do, but also being aware that I haven't done it yet, so it's not actually there. So that's the system that I want. We'll see how successful I am at actually executing on it when I get to that point. The Crossroads of Reality. This is where the last psychopomp to not go missing resides. I already talked about this stuff previously, however, so we're just going to jump along. Yeah, fast travel is just the idea is the Crossroads of Reality had, when everything collapsed, the Crossroads of Reality no longer had all of its connections everywhere. So as you go to new places, because of the pocket dimension portal that you carry around in your pocket? Sure, we'll go with that. It reconnects or allows the last psychopomp to reconnect locations to the Crossroads of Reality when you encounter them, because it's kind of like, what's the best way of saying this? It's kind of like when you go looking for a missing file and you're creating a shortcut, and it's like all of your shortcut links got broken and you have to go like reconnect them all, and now that they're reconnected, you can just use them willy-nilly. It's kind of like that is sort of the idea. So that's kind of like the lore explanation for the fast travel. Is just like, I want to make sure there's enough fast travel points that you can kind of get around okay. Is fundamentally what it is. But yeah, not a whole lot else to do there. If you die, you show up there and the introduction starts there, and I don't know about the conclusion. Maybe we'll find out. The Abyss. This serves as a sort of prison for the souls of... Okay, I can't explain this without getting into the theology of the game. I mean, it's where it's a prison for the wicked people. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but basically there's the maker that made everything, and then assigned the people who basically trusted the maker with themselves and sought to kind of emulate the maker. They end up being able to join in the maker's work and taking care of realities and like making new ones. And the people who reject the maker and are abusive towards the maker end up going into the abyss. And there's a lot of big bad guys that ended up in the abyss. And then everything collapsed, and that kind of like shunted things out of the abyss. And that's part of what all of the chaos is about. That's kind of the short version. I don't know why I didn't write that, but I didn't feel like it at the time, I guess. So you get it here now. Hooray! That's the very brief version. It's something that is going to be explored over the course of the game, because like anything, the simple version is wrong, but close enough to right that like it gives you a general concept, even if technically it's not actually correct. It's sort of it's the difference between accurate and precise. Accurate is like you have the right like thing that you're looking at. Precise is how much like detail you have in it. So like 3.14 is accurate for pi, but is not very precise. 3 is accurate for pi, but not precise like at all. So like the more precision you have, the more you can end up like becoming inaccurate. So like 3.1419 starts becoming less accurate for pi as your precision increases because you're kind of going off from it in a way. But like you're still in the right. It's a complicated thing. Anyway, I'm getting into the weeds of technical jargon. I've given you like a rough concept of what's going on here, but it's very rough, very high level, and lacking in the nuance and detail that will be present in the game itself when I actually get to that point, because it's going to come from a bunch of different data points that everything's kind of assembled. So, the important thing to know is that a lot of villains were trapped here, but when the various realities collapsed into each other, that basically enabled a jailbreak. There are a lot of abyss gates scattered throughout the world, but they are non-functional because they got turned off to prevent more stuff from escaping from the abyss. Yay! Until the player rescues enough psychopomps, as touched on previously. This allows you to kind of like stabilize the gates and kind of slip through them yourself, is kind of what I'm thinking lore-wise. Kind of a Watsonian explanation. The Doyle's explanation is that's just like this is a more advanced later zone, and I want to put it behind a barrier, and that's finding psychopomps. I like interconnected worlds, and this is one way for me to facilitate that. This is true. One of the things that I really liked about Metroid Fusion is when you started being able to access slippery areas between the different zones. And Dark Souls 1 having shortcuts between areas, it was really cool, and I like worlds that feel really interconnected. So that's something I want to have. The Wandering Wood. Inspired by the Last Woods from many Legend of Zelda games, the Wandering Wood is a twisted, dark forest that connects to many parts of the world. At the heart of the woods dwells a group that hunts demons. They're rather inspired by Bloodborne. This is accurate. The concept has evolved slightly from there. There's also some other stuff that kind of works its way into that. The Wandering Woods is where one of the 4 unlocked classes will be found. I'm not really going to talk about them right now, but eventually. This area has gotten a lot better concepted out. Like this is accurate in terms of like mechanics. It is like it has a bunch of different rooms basically, and you walk between different rooms, and why one room connects to another room is not really like explained or given any reason to be. So you just kind of wander around, but each room is very distinct in how it appears. So like you can eventually kind of build a mental map. Like eventually you just build a map of it. The idea is you manage to find this group in the middle and learn one of the hidden things and use it to get to a bunch of different places. And that's the exciting part, is using it to get to a bunch of different places. So, but yeah, there's going to be some Bloodborne inspiration in the hunters that you find in the heart of the woods that hunt demons. Important note, I've actually gotten to the point, I don't know, I'm feeling a sharing mood, where demons have an angelic appearance. Because demons are fallen angels. That doesn't mean they look hideous or ugly. This is one of the common misconceptions that I want to thank the Middle Ages Catholic Church for. And by which I mean be like, why did you do this? It's really important to remember that they're not hideous, ugly looking things. They in fact look very, like, canonically from Christian mythology, demons look very beautiful, is the idea. And they entice you the wrong way. Like, we remember that like Satan is an angel. So that said, demons in this game are going to look like angels because that's what they are. They are fallen angels. Demons spawn, on the other hand, things that kind of come out of them are representative of what's inside, and those are hideous, horrendous monsters. Yay. So, yeah, there's demon spawn that they also hunt and clean up, and I'm kind of working on some of the stuff. Demon spawn can be destroyed. Demons, not as much, and yeah, it's ugly. They have stuff going on. We won't get into that now because I'm going on way too long, and it is almost 2.5 hours, and I would like to wrap this up sometime before I need to go to bed. Ashdala. This is a world region that contains one of the 8 gym leader bosses. It also serves as the initial area for the player to really explore, as everywhere else is blocked off. Mostly, the player technically starts in Haverai, but can only explore a small section of it. Based heavily on pre-serving Ascalon from Guild Wars 1, this area also serves as a bit of a tutorial section. It also served as a bit of a tutorial section for me as I was working on it. Players familiar with pre-searing will likely find a lot familiar in Ashdala, but there are plenty of differences too. This is accurate, but I did base it pretty heavily, which was really useful for like me getting more of a handle on how I'm going to approach the game design. So, a lot of stuff is different, but definitely heavy inspiration. But you know, when you're doing some serious translation, things are not the same at all. But they do make me think of it, which is what my goal was. Notably, Ashdala will be contained in the demo that I eventually want to release. That's not anytime soon. Like, Ashdala is currently the most developed world region, which means like you can technically beat it. And Ashdala is also where you beating Ashdala will automatically unlock you one of the 4 hidden areas. You unlock one in the Wandering Woods, one at the end of Ashdala, one in the mashup location, and one in Avaray, for those who are curious. For those who wanted to find them on their own, I don't know why you're watching this behind the scenes video. So anyway, the idea here is like Ashdala is very self-contained. I don't want you like wandering everywhere. I want to have a kind of a more here's where you start and like figure things out, because everywhere else is kind of throwing you to the wolves, as it were, in that I'm like expecting you to have stuff down more. And one of the other things is Ashdala is just going to have a very high density of loot to find, equipment for you to like equip your player with, and omni skills and things like that. So it's very important that it has all of that, so that way the player can get equipped up and not wander into areas where maybe they're not going to be able to find equipment very well. So the game's going to open up dramatically once you beat Ashdala, because then you can go literally anywhere else except the Abyss, because the Abyss is still going to be closed because there's only 10 Psychopomps in Ashdala, and you're not finding all of them until you leave and come back. But anyway, there will be hints to other areas and stuff. I have plans for that, but it's important to me to make sure that there's an area where you can kind of like go and some sense of direction, so that way you're not feeling overwhelmed by all of the possibilities, and it kind of builds things up. But yeah, anyway. The United Streets. This world region is the one most based on the United States of America. The shared abbreviation of US is not a coincidence. A couple of the party members are from here, as I wanted a perspective more like the one I'm familiar with from the real world represented in the party. Of course, this is a game, so things are pretty messed up here. The boss plaguing this world region is warping the area, leading to streets that wrap east-west and north-south. Also, a number of buildings have been plunged into a shadowy, distorted version. These are the primary places where monsters will be fought, as the streets themselves are mostly monster-free. This makes the world building work more cleanly. Like, yeah, big thing here with United Streets is I want the people to react a certain way, and if the problem feels like it's very contained for them, I think that opens things up to work a little bit better. But yeah, so two of the characters are from here. The party members are from United Streets. There's 2 from there, 1 from Avaray, 1 from Cybernite City, 1 from Gimnipolis, and 2 from the Kingdom of Dolphy. So it's certainly not representative of everywhere. But I have a little bit of a spread there. And yeah, so this one's kind of the most based in, like, in the United States where I live, and therefore I'm familiar with stuff. You can expect a lot of commentary on the United States from here, but kind of more secondhand and more from the characters that aren't from here and are like in culture shock, because there's going to be a lot of culture shock going on. Gimnipolis. This is one of my least developed world regions. I mean, okay, so a lot of this stuff here let's see. I don't know if it'll be the final name of the area. It will be the final name for the major city. I'm going to just call it that because that's kind of the focus of it. I have more notes now that I wrote down in a nice handy notebook while I was on a recent trip and figured out a bunch of stuff. The long and short of it is they have a big magic shield protecting their city. It's going to be a very brightly lit city. It's going to have a lot of military focus. I read Shadow of the Conqueror by Shad Brooks of Shadiversity on the trip and got like a couple of ideas from that kind of feed into this a little bit of just like there's a bunch of monsters outside the city. So everybody's kind of military trained to an extent or like wants to be. So that way they can like help defend things. So it's a very militaristic place. And yeah, they have a lot of magic shields and stuff. And those sorts of things. So as you can see, I have developed it a lot from the time that this is here. And they use enchantments. And yep, Gymnopolis is from like Greek for naked city. A little bit of massaging to make it kind of fit. And the character from here, Sophelia, her name is she's the nudist character in the party. And the reason why, in part, why I'm not putting videos up on YouTube. And her name is Sophia, mashed with philia. So philia is love, like a love or fondness for something. And Sophia is wisdom. So it's just a very anglicized portmanteau of kind of a love for wisdom. Philosophy comes from that. So it's just kind of like rearranging that and aligning the PHs. So she is from here. They have blue skin and tails. So that's exciting. She's the one that has tail whip that I was mentioning earlier. This is probably a little bit retconned, by which I mean there's not any continuity yet, so it can't really be retconned. It's just a nascent phase, and now it's a little bit more defined. Like, being capable of having the magic to defend yourself and like protect yourself is a sign of skill and capability that's prized in their culture. And if you can't, like, if you need protective stuff, that's an indication that you are weak. And so, like, it's shameful to need to, like, wear oven mitts, for example. I mean, most people probably wouldn't wear clothing anyway, but, like, having to, like, wear protective equipment is, like, a sign that your skill is lacking. And so, you know, that's kind of the Watsonian explanation for it. Again, the Doylist explanation is that I wanted somewhere that just represented the nudist aspect of myself. So, Avaray is another party member starts here. This is another one that like I had a slight concept for. There's some ruins. It's a modern setting, and it's got some ideas from the Sacred Realm from the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. This has been expanded a great deal. It's just the feeling of having like an overlay realm. So this one's going to be a little bit more rural feeling, more like here's some small towns. But the modern setting version, there's a couple of places that are going to be kind of like that. I would say the Kingdom of Dolphy is going to have something of that feel that we'll get to. In a fantasy setting, Astrala probably has a bit of that feel in a fantasy setting. But like on my recent trip, I went to where I grew up, which is a small town in Indiana, and sort of the experience of doing a little bit of a road trip there and driving around there really kind of impressed upon me. So I want this to be a place where it's like, here is like 5 small towns in a more of a modern setting that tries to capture more of that feel of like rural America, small town. And then there's just some ruins in a couple of places and some other stuff going on with like enemies in the sacred area. Like these sacred realm areas develop where people gather, and people try to communicate with them with rituals, and ectoplasm is a really important part of that, which is why people go to harvest it from the starting area that you start in. Hooray. You have no context for this. Woo! And we end up having, what's the right word? We end up having, there's basically I took the idea of like the 7 deadly sins. Okay, what's the neutral thing that the 7 deadly sins are the sins of? And then instead of kind of going the classic route of like, oh, here's the sin of lust. It's like, okay, here's the neutral thing of like, or the positive thing of like desire. So what happens if we go, like sin in the concept of like, what happens if we indulge in this and you have things going off that way, which is where you get like more traditional lust concepts. But what happens if you go the other way and you repress it? You try to shut down the good thing of desire in your desire to avoid the extreme direction the other way. And that's like where it leads to like loneliness. I have a whole thing of these written down. I'm not going to go over them right now. There's one for each, like 2 directions for each of the 7 deadly sins, where it's like, here's the thing in the middle, like, envy. So envy is coming off of contentedness. If you are content, cool. You go one way and you go towards envy or covetousness, right? And if you go the other way, you go into undeserving, where you don't think you deserve anything that you have. Instead of being content with it, you feel like, I don't deserve any of this. I shouldn't be allowed to have this sort of thing. So it's like you have negative things going off of both directions, but they're 2 different sort of ways of going about it. So this kind of plays into what's going on in Avaray. And like normally things can't like breach the barrier. They can just kind of like exert influence. There are some rituals that can cause things to breach the barrier, and that's why you have ruins, everyone. People did a dumb, but the sort of like villainous entity of this area is kind of serving as a bridge to allow these things to kind of pool out. So that's kind of the idea of what's going on here in Avaray. You're getting a lot more details about each section because I actually have details now. Bowan is a land in a snowy post-apocalyptic setting. In their distant past, some sort of magically induced catastrophe wrecked their world. These days it is led by a high princess, who serves as the representative of what is functionally a magical supercomputer dedicated to keeping everyone alive. There's a little bit more to it than that. A lot of the enemies, and like this is going to be kind of like, I'm not exactly sure the layout of areas yet. This one like needs a little bit more concepting, but it's going to be more like low tech with very high tech ruins off in the distance that are kind of like you don't go there because all of the magically created mutants are there. But also the villain of this region is basically like a guy who was, this is the current concept anyway. It might mature a little bit from here, but a guy who was fighting against what is now Bowan, and is resurrecting all of his soldiers to go and attack you too. So that's great. So you have kind of like a couple of different things going on there, and specifically trying to shut down the supercomputer. And they have a bunch of defensive crystals around ley lines to keep monsters out of their towns and off their roads. The magical mutants. So that's kind of the concepts there. The High Princess is specifically because there's some stuff going on that allows her to kind of like put her body in a sort of biostasis where she's not aging or like having much change. But like that process kind of breaks down over time, and when it does, she gets replaced by another princess. Like she gets to retire, hooray, and live the rest of her normal life. Another high princess is chosen. It's kind of like more of a high priestess in some regards, but anyway, she kind of serves as a leader for the people, and everybody is very reverential of her and her role. So, some more details to figure out here, but it's a little bit more developed, and I at least have something to kind of work off of and some mental concepts for things. The Kingdom of Dolphy. Your party members have the last name of Dolphy from here because one of them's the princess and the other's her husband. So, hooray. Yes, I want a married couple in my RPG. Normalize having married couples in video games, in your RPGs, in your parties that, get along and like each other. This has been my 30 seconds of TED Talk in the middle of this 2-hour and 40-minute video. So far. We are almost done. This world region draws inspiration from the Legend of Zelda series, especially Ocarina of Time, though I have researched other Zelda games for general inspiration as well. 2 of the party members are from here. I just mentioned them, sort of. Mercedes and Nathan. The player's goal in this region is to find 6 dungeons and defeat the fragmented aspects of an ancient evil that was once sealed away. Those seals are getting really leaky, or in one case have broken entirely, thanks to the collapse that kicked off the game. Specifically, they're all got bound, like an ancient hero defeated an evil Goranov is the name, because why not? And I mean, if you know a reason why not, let me know. But broke it into 6 pieces, bound it to equipment, and sealed it away in some sealing grounds around the area. And one of those is completely busted open, and the others are kind of like leaking. So when you defeat the various parts, you get the gear, which is really cool, including a fun reference, the Pegasus charm, which is a fun reference. When you use it, it greatly magnifies your character run speed. So a lot of people are probably going to want to go here first if they know about that, which you do thanks to this video. It is in the game and functional, and yeah, it lets you get around a lot faster. This region features empty bottles you can collect, which serve to store potions and bombs and bomb bags. The bottles, to be clear, store potions. This sentence needed some workshopping. You can find empty bottles that can store potions. You can also find bomb bags that allow you to store bombs. I'm thinking like 3 bomb bags, each one carrying 10 bombs, so you can get up to 30 bombs. I don't know. I might change I might change those values depending upon how they feel. My current plans are for 7 bottles. The potions are like really good healing items, but you have to go to Dolphy to be able to get them. And yeah, the bombs can be used to blow up cracked walls. Some cracked walls lead to grottos that will reseal themselves when you open another of the grottos where the chests are that give you loot. Other ones will lead you to basically great fairies that will give you a ring and can heal your health and MP, but not cure you of curses or conditions. So very different from the other things. And some of them will just open secret areas. Even outside of the Kingdom of Dolphy, so that's going to be fun. And then other Legend of Zelda references throughout. It is a lot like more generically based than like if you know it's based off of the Legend of Zelda, you'll probably be able to tell. But if you don't, maybe you'll be able to pick it up. But like it's not screaming it the same way. Like if you've played a Legend of Zelda game, it's like, oh yeah, I can see like it smells of Legend of Zelda. Whereas if you play the Guild Wars one, it's like, oh yeah, that very much so. In Ashdala, if you've played Pre-Searing specifically, you're like, oh yeah, this is giving me some real strong like vibes. Cybernite City. Yeah, one of the Deborah is from here. I'm just giving you names of characters right now. It's the last of the characters. It does have a distinct theme because it's nighttime. I have developed it a lot more. There needs to be a little bit more, but basically the city, like at one point in time, there's some sort of like Monster King that was defeated. And when the Monster King was defeated, all of the like minions it had made basically couldn't sustain themselves anymore. So they just started decomposing into just raw magic. And so those were used in reactors to basically build civilization. And they've started the process of retrofitting because they're kind of running out of monster corpses. That are decaying into magic. It's like only the big ones are left, I guess, or something. I don't know. I haven't thought about that deeply. But so they've begun the process of retrofitting, but they didn't finish it. And then this thing happened, and then the Monster King is back, and he's resurrecting his minions and making new ones. And now the city's got some parts that are like, oh no, we are overwhelmed by monsters, and other parts that are like, well, I'm glad we did that retrofitting project as far as we did. So that's kind of like what's going on there. There's some other stuff going on here too. Like one thing that is important to me is like it's kind of playing around with this idea of like how sexualization like looks, but also when you have this weird, because like one of the things I think is a really weird dichotomy where it's like simultaneously you're highly sexualizing things, but at the same time you're like, but don't be too sexy or that's bad, and like it creates a really weird system, and like all sorts of stuff kind of related to that are kind of like be in there, but there's a lot more going on than just that. But like, yeah, it does serve as a strong contrast with Gimnipolis, which isn't a particularly sexualized place. It's very militarized, in fact, but is like very pro-nudity. So it's just an interesting contrast to me. Then the mashed up area, which is ground zero for the events. There's a bunch of mess of things happening here because of it. Angels are here. I don't talk about the mechanics here. I think I do. No, I do a little bit here. I want this place to feel a little bit like an entrance randomizer. So for those who don't know what this is, an entrance randomizer, it is a concept in the randomizer bigger concept, which you can see in a lot of the Legend of Zelda games. have randomizers for them. Ocarina of Time, A Link to the Past are kind of the better known ones. Majora's Mask has a randomizer. Many of them have randomizers. And it's just a way of like reshuffling where items are found, so that way you kind of explore the world in a different way, which is really cool, and sometimes with items in different orders than you normally would get them. Entrance randomizers take this idea and say, what if walking in this building takes you in a different place than normal? So, for example, if we're talking Ocarina of Time, what if exiting Link's house, instead of taking you to the Kokiri Forest, has you exit into, I don't know, say Kakariko Village and one of the houses there instead. So like you go back in through it and it's like, oh, I'm back in Link's house. You exit it, I'm in Kakariko Village. This creates a different experience when different places are linked up. It can get pretty extreme depending upon like how much you want to go with it. So like things of like you leave Kakariko Village through the graveyard and you find yourself in the desert wastes in Gerudo Desert. It's like, okay, why that's there? Your brain is just like, at first your brain is like, oh, what the heck is going on? And then you're like, well, these transitions are kind of abstracted enough that your brain just kind of like, I guess I will just let be. But I want that sort of feeling of like things are kind of weirdly connected. So like as you go through these entrances, I want them to kind of like shuffle themselves between a couple of different locations. There's going to be some complexity here, and I'm going to have to play around with it a bit to kind of make sure it works and is not like really frustrating, but also creates kind of an interesting dynamic experience. So yeah, and then it's a complete mess. So there's a bunch of angels that have shown up and are like, oh, we got to clean up this mess, yo. So I'm not 100% sure what enemies are going to look like here, but except for weird. I mean, within the constraints of the provided assets, I guess. So that kind of limits things some. But yeah, this is kind of a different area. And the other thing too is there's Anora Frage, which is the fantasy setting, and then Ida Manoth, which is the sci-fi setting. That's like very sci-fi. Like basically think like this is Star Trek world that got mushed into this fantasy setting. Both of these areas need a little bit more development before I like really dig into this, but the mechanics are there. This is probably the one that like now has kind of the least development, which is kind of cool that other areas are so much more developed. But that kind of brings us to the end of this. I've obviously had more to share at this later point in time. Very hefty introduction. There's a lot more to discuss over time as I get more things done, talking about character classes and other things. I would like to find a way to be able to share more about what the combat looks like. I just don't know how I want to do that at this point in time because, again, one of the characters, there's like, I don't want to like make this like too big of a thing because I don't think it should be, but one of the characters is a nudist, and like I just don't want to deal with how YouTube is going to handle that, so I don't know how to share a video of like combat systems or how any of those things look. So this is just how it is. But I'm going to wrap up here. You can ask questions on my Discord server. You can go to my my website here. There should be a link to the Discord server in the thing down below. I do post updates about what I've been doing in the game as part of my Dear Patrons daily diary over on my Patreon. You can find a link to my Patreon down below in the description as well. If that's something you want to do. It is at the $5 tier, so it's $5 per month. But I do post daily updates about what's going on in my life. They're just diary entries. A lot of it is about how terrible my sleep is. That's actually not true. A little bit of it is about how terrible my sleep is at the start of every one, because my sleep is often terrible and I wish it wasn't. But that's beside the point. So you can find more stuff there. If that's something that you really want to do, I definitely appreciate it. But obviously, I will be posting regular updates about what's going on as well. Because I do want to share what's going on in the project. I want people to be interested in it and all that sort of thing. It will be a while before it's done, though. And I'm talking like I'm expecting it to be like order of some number of years, not months, for this thing to be done. So we'll see how quickly things go. But I don't think they go super fast. So, but yeah, if you want more regular news about what's going on in the game, that's where to go find it. And thank you for reading along with me. Thank you for listening. I need to go give my voice a break. This has been Santier talking about Psychopomps Are Missing on YouTube for almost 3 hours. I hope you enjoy. Goodbye.